It was in 2021st year. At that time, the first tower in Prague appeared. All the people of the city were both frightened and surprised by this phenomenon. Some even thought that the world was coming to an end. And a year ago, there were only remnants of cities that had been destroyed, except for the other 5 towers on these sites. The tower gave people a chance of salvation because of the light that came from it. A short time later, the same tower appeared in Seoul, and it was just as inspiring to its residents. People had only one thing left to believe in the best. So the towers became the place where they began to build a new world. None of the survivors understood how the world in which they existed had come to this present. But despite all the questions, they had a goal to reach the top of the tower. Everyone without exception tested their strength and tried to conquer the very top. Those who could do it had fame and fortune. Their popularity could outdo all the feats of humanity. That's how they got their constellation name. They were also the only ones who were so close to the secrets of the tower. They were the ones who gave faith in the continuation of the family and a happy future. And so 36 years passed. During this time, there were many events where you had to survive. One of them involved a guy. He was beginning to think that there were no other survivors left. But suddenly, he heard a voice that distracted him from what was happening. He couldn't believe his ears. However, there were many lifeless people around. It seemed that the end was truly coming now. Our hero began to remember the best in the history of Seoul Tower. Kneeling down, he convinced himself that everyone had done their best. And at the same time, in his words, was an appeal to the so-called Platinum Monarch, who sacrificed himself for him. Under the oppression of such a mood, it seemed a foolish act and a senseless rescue. At the same second, the boy was pulled out of the deep musings in his head by a sharp rumble. Right in front of his face appeared an indescribable-sized serpent that with its piercing gaze did not inspire good intentions. But our hero looked at the huge serpent, and it was as if he saw someone else in its place. He was dumbfounded how it remained fine after so many wounds, and the boy, placing his hand on the lifeless ground like the others, asked only for the blessing of the constellations. Suddenly, from this position, his hand came together sharply into a fist. He realized there was nothing he could do about it. And of course, his death wouldn't be the best solution either, since those who have fallen in battle will not return at the snap of a finger anyway. At that moment, the fearsome serpent swooped toward the young boy, snapping him out of his musings. Its sharp fangs and venomous tongue wanted something terrible. It was in that second that the fighter thought he would not give up and would continue to fight for his life, for the life of humanity. A glow appeared from the serpent's mouth in the form of a bright ball. He was ready to strike. But our hero was not frightened by such an impulse and threw himself with a fighting spirit. The guy did a left-to-right kick, and so on several times. The adrenaline rush made him stop after a while and breathe heavily. Suddenly, the situation around him changed. Everything quieted down and there was no longer any danger. He didn't realize what was happening. A voice nearby made it clear that the guy hadn't come to his senses for a long time, and everything that was happening now was not true. He couldn't realize where he was and where the serpent he had just been in an altercation with had gone. Because he didn't understand what was going on, he couldn't think of anything better to do than to run. He thought that these guys might just be from another tower. But then Silhouette told his partner that he was a very athletic freshman, trying to get away like that. The guy was really freaked out by all of this. He couldn't believe his ears. There were 100 questions in his head. And he got hit with an unexpected blow, supposedly bringing the guy back to the present. A couple of other voices whispered nearby. Since our hero turned out to be older than the presenters of the dialogue, he should have been respected rather than given blows, some of those present said. But there were also those who were against it. The survivor clutched his head and tried to answer in his own to the questions of where the snake had gone, what was going on around him, and who these people were. But he was called back by a loud commanding voice, who questioned what the guy was mumbling in his non-existent fight, and repeated what he'd said before he met the snake. There was confusion on the warrior's face. How did these people know what he said before he went into battle? With a menacing tone, his words were quoted to him. There was a part of indignation in them too as to why the man had decided that death was the solution to the situation. The guy was even more frightened by these words because he thought for a moment that he was alone in the world and there was no one around. After that, a flurry of condemnations accompanied by blows to his body. Despite the blows, the fighter heard the High Magician and his interlocutor arguing about what was happening. The first understood our hero, and the second, on the contrary, condemned such indifference to his life. From the dialogue, it became clear that the serpent was not a dream after all, and could be defeated in another way. And so he turned his attention to himself. The bright blue eyes turned sharply on him with full aggression, which confirmed that there was no surrender. The boy's eyes widened to an unbelievable size. He could have saved all his comrades if he had known about it earlier. With desperation in his voice, he shouted into the crowd. He wanted to understand who the people around him were and why they knew so much. The fighter knelt down and clutched at the leg of one of the men standing nearby. He begged to be told how he could win the fight with the serpent, where he was, and most importantly, with whom. Fear appeared on his face, mixed with all the other emotions when he heard what looked like an answer to his question. People said he still hadn't seen. The familiar figures appeared in front of him and handed him a bottle of liquid. They wanted to make him understand what was happening. After all, according to them, our hero had a long recovery time after his death. A few drops got on the guy. He didn't realize what was happening to him, but his eyes began to clear. Two silhouettes that had been completely black for a couple of seconds began to take on colors and outlines. His pupils narrowed, lightning fast at what he saw. He could finally see the people standing in front of him. He was surprised. Two men in different outfits stood in front of his face. One greeted him with a grin, and the other, more friendly, and they claimed to be them only in different guises. Such a statement would frighten anyone, and our hero was no exception. He again did not understand how such a thing could be possible. They practically said with one voice that they were the one who died earlier. This news finally put the guy in a stupor. After a while, in a quieter environment, the guy was brought up to speed. Turns out they have the ability to regress. It was very hard to believe, because the boy did not remember anyone from the audience. The reason was that every time he died, he just lost all the memories he had. This outcome didn't do much to help me understand what was going on around me. Each time, it was as if there were more tasks to be solved. But all this was unimportant, for our hero was to return to his 20th year when his hands were extremely down, and everything that had happened again was about to disappear into oblivion. But then what was the point of the regression, if the same thing happened every time? But his two individuals told of their accomplishments. One of them joined the mage community and was granted first from the tower status. The second went the other way and joined the alchemist community. There he obtained the status of dynamite from the tower. But this was the first time the young lad had heard of the existence of just such statuses. As the conversation continued, it turned out that there are no more than 10 people like that here. And those who are interested in the current world are only 2. People like that are called crazy, because all the memories are constantly fading away. But to keep anything from regression, you have to get to the top of the constellations. It's the only way to see the next life. At this moment, it became clear to the guy why his death caused such a storm of negative emotions. In a way, it was their curse. They could only trust that they would do better next time. Our hero was upset by the realization that this was the end for him, and he would be left with others to watch over future souls. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise coming from all directions. It only frightened the newcomer. The others were already used to such events. They already understood what this was all about. But the guy kept asking what these two were even talking about and what was about to start. The answer was quite obvious and predictable. They were talking about the regression that was going to happen again. And after those words, the guy felt like he'd been electrocuted. His eyes shrank sharply and glowed. The process was set in motion. After a moment, our hero suddenly opens his eyes. But it's like everything around him is different. It was already quite dark outside, so someone was calling him diligently and asking him to stop lying on the ground. Baek Ho-min was once again already in his familiar state. He still didn't understand anything. There was a guy standing next to him who was clearly annoyed at his buddy's appearance. He was saying that they were in danger and should leave the place. The boy decided to share his thoughts and said that he was as if in another place and was in a dialogue with other people, among whom was the supreme magician. Of course, such words surprised his companion. Baek Ho-min frantically started to look at his hand and didn't notice the seal he had on it. And this was another strange prank on his part in his friend's eyes. There was disappointment in the guy's eyes as he found nothing on his arm. His buddy realized that our hero had to be brought out of this state. He asked him to pull himself together and finally wake up instead of continuing to talk all this nonsense. But then another man with a baton in his hands joined their company. He had a menacing attitude and told them not to try to run away. Otherwise, there would be dire consequences. Our guys decided not to get into a verbal argument and did as they were asked. Baek Ho Min began to reason and assess the situation. This was the 4th floor of Seoul Tower. Here he was a hunter and a 20-year-old moneylender, which was strange. After all, there were no such people before. And this was his new reality that he had to get used to again and learn to survive. Now, the new Seoul was being watched by the 3 of them. They were all wondering what would happen this time and what the outcome would be. Already being in a new reality, the boy thought about his dream, and quite strange. But that was short-lived because all the details began to be forgotten in his mind. At this time, several strangers were after the so-called grave robber and were calling our guys for help. But Baek Ho Min didn't want to do that. Unlike the others, they didn't even have weapons. Turns out these engravers they're after are also guild wizards. So all the dirty work is put on the shoulders of others. In addition, the engravers can spoil their precious seals at will. At the same time, a guy with a seal on his arm was fighting some small creature nearby. He called it a parasite, but it was clear that such insect-like parasites are not the worst threat and should not be feared. As soon as I voiced that thought, a man's heartbreaking scream echoed nearby. Something was wrapped around his arm. It was the engraver. Baek Ho Min didn't know how to react to what was happening. Everything was happening very fast. One guy among them ran up to the victim with an axe, and everyone guessed what might happen now. A gleaming axe rose above his hand. Whoever swung it was sure it was the best solution for whoever was attacked. It was a scary sight, and that guy's loud screams made it even scarier. The man who experienced such an event was then carried to their den on the orders of his partner. The formidable man warned the boys not to relax, as the engravers were always ready to attack, and he reminded them that they had seals and abilities, unlike the others. He also added that to miss the engraver was to invite the same fate that had befallen that guy a few minutes ago. Baek Ho Min is probably just now starting to realize that this isn't a joke, and it's all happening for real. The man, in a commanding voice, asked even more with a shout, asked the guys why they were standing there and not moving forward. And the lads immediately moved forward at a rapid pace at the order of the chief among them. They were very curious about what the engraver they were looking for had done. There was a suggestion that he might have done something to the elder that he didn't like. Elder is usually referred to as a famous moneylender by locality, and a lord has the special title of spider. And the spider legs are the leaders in his organization, so the elder is one of his legs. He took Baek Ho Min in when he was about 10 because he's also the head of the orphanage. And now the boy is living like that because of that. The guys began to speculate about what the engraver had done. It was hardly a question of money, since with their own seals, they already had a lot of it. But they probably shouldn't have made mistakes, because others would have immediately disliked the guys. It was known that engravers have the ability to make poor quality seals, and that makes for some very bad skills. Thanks to such a gift, no constellation would ever pay attention to a human being. Such words puzzled our hero. The new seals, when applied to the hand, give people one ability, and the wearer has the ability to start life as a hunter. So through the seals, the constellations themselves choose and can train their successors. But if they don't care about you, it's better to be without seals at all. Baek Ho Min thought it was best not to even meet the engraver to avoid everything. Those who tried to catch him were always wounded, and there was no way out for the boys. The boy realized that he didn't even have a seal yet and had to try harder. But if he got to an engraver before then, he could forget about becoming a hunter. And at that moment, his buddy suddenly screamed as if he was scared of something or someone. It seemed like they were just talking about it. It was the engraver, should have run or fought. The graver was clearly annoyed at being caught, but then he took his hunters by surprise. But Baek Ho Min was not alarmed by his possible demise. He threw himself at the engraver in retaliation. The boy made a sharp dash forward with his sword, but the engraver managed to dodge. Then his opponent suddenly intercepted his sword, and our hero could not believe his eyes. There was almost nothing left of his weapon that had been fully functional a few seconds ago. He just melted it. And then when Baek Ho Min lost his guard from what had happened, he launched the rest of his sword at the guy. A strong and very unpleasant blow came to the boy, but at least he managed to cover his face from such an onslaught. In the fight, the guy's hand got hurt defending himself. Ho Min's partner got scared by that. And on the adrenaline, he flew at his buddy's offender with a kick. The engraver didn't see that coming. And our hero's arm was being corroded in those seconds by the sudden wounding of the enemy. But he was accosted by another guy who had just caught the graver and was trying to restrain him. But Baek Ho Min didn't respond to the request and was furious because he had mutilated his arm, or worse. The two men began to clamp down on the enemy with force. They did not hear his pleas for mercy because of their anger. But then the guy who was with Ho-min changed his expression to one of surprise. He noticed a pile of gold coins falling from the engraver's cloak. It sparkled and shimmered brightly, even in the nightlight. Of course, he wondered how much one such coin would cost, so he asked a friend about it. The price was high. It was 114 million won. That was the amount of money to get a seal. Our hero realized that even if he worked for a few years, he wouldn't be able to earn that much. The other guy started to go through the coins unceremoniously, but Baek Ho-min said in a judgmental manner that it was not allowed because it was the elder's money. But the guy wasn't exactly pressed by a clear conscience. All he saw in such temptation was money. Ho-min asked him contemptuously what he was going to do with such a large sum. The boy didn't want any repercussions after such an action. He guessed whose money it was, or else why it was here. But his partner didn't care. He argued his behavior because he was already rich. They needed the money more. But our guy wasn't tempted. Even though he could have gotten a stamp for that amount, he knew that to take that money was to attract his own doom. The other guy wasn't really listening to what Ho-min was saying. He was looking at the gold coins, and he noticed something strange. These gold coins usually had a tower on them. This one had the seal of a constellation carved on it. Baek Ho-min was surprised by such a statement. After all, it was very unusual. Such a constant influx of events was starting to give him a splitting headache. At that moment, our hero's eyes crossed with the cunning gaze of the engraver, and he made a sharp jerk and freed himself. As our boys relaxed, he grabbed Ho-min's hand again, and it burst into flames. A hellish pain pierced the boy, and his partner was so distracted by the coins that he didn't even notice he was under attack again. With a snide look and the same voice, the engraver held the guy's hand, and it was clear from his words that he was putting a seal on it. It was a most unpleasant procedure, if I may say so. The kid was screaming in pain, and the engraver with the same sly face continued to gloat, and he was eagerly wondering what kind of miserable ability the seal bearer would get. Baek Ho-min, through the pain, asked his abuser to let go of his hand and stop it. And then his friend finally decided to act and ran at the engraver with a swing. He thought of nothing better than to take the biggest rock near him and hit his opponent with it. From such a blow, the engraver fell to the ground with a clatter. The boys breathed a sigh of relief. The latter was very worried about his friend and pounced on Baek Ho-min with questions about his well-being. With a very contorted grimace, our hero said that the engraver used those gold coins to put the seal. On the guy's hand appeared the exact same image of what was on the coins. But his interlocutor seemed more concerned that those coins were not real, but merely fake. After his friend was upset that he wouldn't become rich, Baek Ho-min began to realize the pain of what had happened. The seal could only be obtained once in a lifetime, and this fact frightened our hero. It was unlikely that the engraver could give him something good. He could only hope and trust that his skill would be useful. The seal was obtained, and the guy got the 4th level memory skill. Such a seal helps to solve problems in the present by referring to the past. The wording made Ho-min stumped. At this moment, he had a sudden headache after learning about his skill. And at the same time, the 3 people who were watching the world began to have a sudden jolt. They were all confused. It's never happened before that the subconscious world has been subjected to an earthquake, if I may say so. One of them noticed that something was also happening to the great wizard. It was the change that was happening to his body. It seemed to vaporize before the eyes of those present. And in the real world, in these same minutes, Baek Ho-min seems to have activated his new skill without realizing it himself. The seal has begun its work. A great wizard in the form of a ghost appeared over our boy's body. He seemed to realize what was about to happen. Apparently, their life experiences were almost 100% similar. The transmigration was done, and the boy had a strange feeling about it. He had knowledge in his head that he had never had before. It was as if he had been given a powerful force. He felt he could use the skill now. And then his partner began to ask him excitedly not to do anything and not to touch the seal in an attempt to do something with it. Our hero did not think to stop what he had started and only reassured his friend that everything was fine. The guy definitely wanted to test his newfound skill, and with his other hand, he continued to do something with the seal. His buddy realized that there was no way to change his mind and ran for help. At this time, the Master Great Wizard was trying to change the seal on the boy, realizing that the one he had was useless. His actions were affecting the boy at the same second. The wizard's hands were so blessed that he could do it. He was determined to make gold out of what the engraver had bestowed upon him. A voice inside Baek Ho Min was speaking in the form of a master to make him believe in him, and most importantly believe in himself, that everything would work out. As if by magic, the seal on my hand began to change. It glowed from the middle of its image. Ho Ming looked at his hand with delight and amazement. At the same time, the wizard himself was watching what was happening. From the guy's hand, a bright light burst out from where the seal had just been, blinding everything around him. The same strikingly radiant glow began to appear in the tower, to the top of which only the constellations reached. All the people who were just minding their own business were staring at the bright light. There was a look of amazement on their faces. The survivors looked at the tower, now as if it were the day they had just started, and the light from the tower suddenly stopped. Baek Ho Min looked at his hand and noticed that the seal was different. It was fixed. The boy watched and could not realize how it happened and what influenced it. This connection to the constellation called the One was heightened. At this point, the guy didn't realize what the One meant, and his mind began to cloud over. Ho Min collapsed to the ground like a limp body. This kind of treatment made him faint. The same thing happened to the wizard correcting a bad seal from an engraver. He appeared to be already in the subconscious world from whence he came. It became clear that he was the One by the way he was addressed. With anxious voices, they began to question the wizard about what had happened. After all, before their eyes, he had simply disappeared. With some kind of helplessness, the master told me that the guy had obtained a 4th level seal. The rest of the world tried to cheer him up and claimed that the guy would still have skills and better. But the wizard went on to say with disappointment that no one lived with such a mark for more than a month. Bad things always happened to them on their own, or they were taken away. The newcomer to their world couldn't believe his ears. He didn't understand how no one with such a seal had ever lived again. And abruptly, the wizard started screaming with all his might. By this action, he frightened the others, and they again tried to calm down their buddy. They tried to turn everything into a positive mood. And then something happened that surprised everyone even more. The wizard started laughing and said that Baek Ho Min would live, and he was their hope. The other two looked at each other and thought there was something wrong with their partner. He couldn't change his mood so quickly, especially when he was talking nonsense. The master was wildly excited to convey his joy to the boys. He said with inexpressible joy that the boy had acquired one of the strongest skills. The newcomer wondered how it was possible that a level 4 skill turned out to be another high-level skill after all. Interrupting him, the one asked if he knew what skill he needed to have to reach the top of the tower. Of course, the newcomer had no answer. It was a really tough question, because even with the strongest skills, no one gave a guarantee that you would get to the top. But with this skill, everything was about to change. Mr. Wizard has waited so long for such a seal to appear. There's no telling who would be able to use such a seal. But Ho Min did. He used it to summon a wizard, and the wizard fixed the seal in time. Because the memory skill was enhanced, he was collecting all the experiences of past regressions. In that case, with an improved skill, one could use the memories of others. It was like a true rebirth. But it was too early to rejoice, because no one with such a skill could last long yet. Although this was not so upsetting to the inhabitants of the subconscious world, they realized that they were now in the best position they had been in a long time. If our hero can properly utilize his new gift, then they have a chance to conquer the tower. Meanwhile, Baek Ho Min was suffering from an unpleasant pain in his arm due to the wizard's interference. His sleep was interrupted by this feeling, but at first the guy even forgot about what had happened until he saw his bandaged palm. And of course, the boy wasn't aware of the power the wizard had given him. He wanted to be at least a level 3 hunter. Now he's a 4th, and some kind of memory that didn't seem to help much. The boy didn't think it was a promising skill to just remember things well. After beating himself up, he decided to pull himself together. After all, with the acquisition of the seal, he was definitely stronger than he had been before its appearance, which means with each time his strength will grow, and with proper effort, he will definitely become a hunter. Baek Ho Min mentally lived for several years and thought about how he would get out of the slum he was living in. It was as if he was shouting to his bright future that they would meet soon. And of course he hadn't forgotten another of his goals is to get to the top of the tower. His sweet reverie was interrupted by the guests. They were 2 people he didn't know yet. But when he looked closely, he recognized one of the men as the elder himself. He was shocked that he had come to see him. Ho-min began to apologize very inarticulately and make excuses for not messing with his gold, but that was not why the man was here. In a serious tone, the elder ordered his companion to check on our hero. The one immediately obeyed the order and asked the boy to show his bandaged hand, and the boy was wary of such an edict. But the elder made it clear that there was no need to be afraid. He was not going to be reprimanded, but rather he came here to congratulate him. It was about his recent capture of the engraver. The guy didn't think it was the reason for the visit at all. Ho-min shared his heroic act with his friend Hyun-soo, as the latter was also involved in capturing the enemy. The elder gave gruesome details of what happened to the engraver and what condition he was found. He died on the spot, and the man praised the boy for bringing back the gold he had found. The boy lowered his eyes to the floor and listened to the stately man and agreed with what he said. He told the story of the coins. They were originally the currency that the Platinum Monarch wanted to introduce in the future. They were going to be released next month, but an engraver managed to forge them. Baek Ho-min was listening to the story and thinking at the same time and decided to ask the man why he was sharing such information with him. The man was at the lowest level and was nothing. The elder reacted calmly to such a question and explained to our hero that he would not have been told these stories before. Only now he had an exact copy of the coin in the form of a seal on his hand. The boy looked at his hand in horror, as if he'd forgotten it existed, and said the engraver had given it to him. But the elder wanted the appearance of this seal to be kept secret. In addition, if the boy told him the truth, he promised him a good job and a good paycheck. Ho-min had a look of complete surprise on his face at this moment. His eyes became rounder than usual. He couldn't believe that the elder was serious. Despite the look on the guy's face, he continued his monologue. And then came the question about the skill. If there was a seal, then there was a skill. However, the boy was sure that to give away his skill was to reveal his weakness. The man was surprised and even repeated the guy's words with a question. The man was surprised and even repeated the guy's words, but with a question. Just like that, the elder changed his imperious look to one of condescension and thought that the boy had dared to lie to him. But our hero, with confidence in his voice and body, answered that all his words are pure truth. But the man did not believe him and said that Ho-min would become his direct subordinate and he was obliged to tell him only the truth. Then he repeated his question again. Already with some anger in his voice, the guy repeated again that his skill is memory and he doesn't lie. Though our hero was sincere and pure before the elder, he did not believe him. The head ordered his subordinate to get the truth serum to crack the kid. At that time, the boy struggled to repeat over and over again to be heard that his skill was memory. But it was pointless because the serum that the elder's companion had gotten had already penetrated his neck very quickly. Baek Ho-min, after injecting the drug, suddenly weakened and his gaze faded slightly. With a look of both cunning and malice, the subject added that the serum would soon take effect, but in the meantime, he would go and get some interrogation tools. The guy began to slowly weaken, and only the question of what was happening now resounded in his mind. It had been a while, but it was hard to know how long. Ho-min woke up and didn't know where he was, but he was still in the same tent. He began to remember that the bald man had injected him with truth serum and then nothing. But something had changed while he was unconscious. Next to him was a cart with various tools. Of course, Ho-min immediately thought he was going to be tortured. From behind the tent door, voices could be heard saying that the boy was not lying, and according to the engraver's information, it was indeed a memory skill. But then it was not clear why the White Knight had appeared. Overhearing this conversation, the kid realized that he wasn't going to be believed after all. Behind the door were an elder and his subject. They were the ones who were dialoguing, and they were very eager to know what they wanted to do with the counterfeit coins, even if they had to take drastic measures. The guy was trapped and didn't know what would happen to him if he stayed here, but it was clear that nothing good would happen. The elder could have sent him to the next world. Baek Ho-min brainstormed and began to come up with a plan to save himself, and it was as if it had hit him. He looked at his bandaged arm again and decided that his skill could be of good use to him now. He used the seal to select Dynamite's life experience from the subconscious world. Their experiences were very different. As soon as the seal began its work in the boy's mind, knowledge that had not been there before reappeared. All the jars that were in the cart next to him he recognized. He knew every ingredient in the jar. Our hero saw it all for the first time in his life, but he knew what he needed. All the bottles with unfamiliar but understandable ingredients were mixed in the same container. It was like our guy was obsessed with mixing everything. He was almost sure he was doing the right thing. Suddenly, an uncharacteristic sound came from his tent. The elder and the bald man standing nearby reacted to such an unexpected and sudden noise. They hurried rather to the tent, and when they came in, they saw the smog and smelled a strange odor. And Baek Ho-min, unfortunately, or fortunately, was no longer in the tent. His bed was empty. The subordinate of the head realized that perhaps the smoke was not smoke at all, but poisonous gas, and tried to push his commander away from the tent. The bald man was furious at the prank. Realizing that the boy couldn't run far away, he chased after him. At this time, the elder wasted no time either and called his reinforcements to catch the boy. The man was furious that he had to go down to the 4th floor in the hunt for the engraver, and now he had to chase after the young guy. The elder knew that ordinary people can only go up to the 4th floor, and if they missed Ho-min and he escaped to the 5th floor, it would be a failure for them. With all the anger, the head also managed to respect the guy. He especially appreciated his sharp mind. However, the question followed as to what reasons motivated him to such actions. The man began to recall the events of the previous night. He tried to find a connection between the tower's glow and the fact that the boy had received his first seal from the engraver. On top of that, there were constellations that hadn't been there before. After the reasoning, the elder clearly set a goal to investigate the guy's seal at any cost. As the man thought through his plan to capture the kid, a cold weapon was presented to his throat. It was Baek Ho-min who had managed to catch the eye of such a stately and wise man. The guy decided to solve everything initially peacefully, namely by a normal conversation. The elder was confused at what he could pick out of a room full of unknown smoke. The boy revealed the secret. He simply created an antidote to the toxic gas in advance and took it. He also dug a hole in the ground beforehand to put his head in. In this position, he was able to stay in the air pocket he had created for half an hour. Because of the boy's frankness, the man assumed that the truth serum was still working on him, but the boy did not want to waste time on idle chatter and was determined to end it all. Baek Ho-min tied the old man to a tree and began his monologue. Since he had received the seal recently, he wanted to teach insubordination to that one. But due to the current situation, he wanted to get his paycheck that he was promised. It puzzled the elder that the boy had done all this just to get some money. His life was worth more than that. Realizing that it was indeed a bit Ho-min, said that he would take it all together. The boy began to list all the things he had been doing for a long time, but had yet to be rewarded. He had to rob street vendors to take obscure lab-made drugs, and other unpleasant errands that added up to a decent sum. It was about 175 million won. The elder was astonished at the boy's insolence. He recalled that he had been provided with shelter, food, and upbringing. That amount could already be minuscule. But if you go into detail, the shelter consisted of moldy beds in the basement, and the food was in the form of rotten oatmeal. And on that note, the guy made it clear to the man that he needed to worry more about the value of his life. Despite the boy's determined tone, the elder realized that it would be difficult for someone who had lived on the streets for 20 years to simply take another person's life. Then Ho-ming looked into the old man's inner pocket and found a silver coin there. It could be exchanged for money. It was worth about 10 million won. But that wouldn't even cover 10% of the full amount the boy demanded, so he told the man he'd come back for the rest later. He learned that from the man. The formidable man noticed that the boy had matured before his eyes and also warned him that he himself would repay the debt. Afterward, Ho-min swung at the old man and hit him on the head to knock him out. The young lad exhaled a sigh of relief when he saw that the elder had lost consciousness from his blow, and he realized that if he left this man just tied to a tree, he would surely come back for him. Already, after what the boy has done, the so-called spider will never leave him alone again. But there was another way out. If Baek Ho-min had sent the man to the other side, he would have had a good chance of survival. As soon as the guy decided to make a dash with his knife towards the elder from the other side, someone's spear flew at him. There was a shout from the bushes that the boy had been found. It must have been the men the man had sent to find Ho-min. The boy ran away from the place as fast as he could, otherwise he would have been caught, and there was no telling what would happen next. A little bit away from those who chased him, the guy stopped and couldn't catch his breath. But still the spear hit the guy's leg. Our hero could barely feel his leg. Perhaps the tip was smeared with some poisonous substance, and that's why there was such an unpleasant reaction. The guy pulled a bottle of something out of his pocket and began to pour it into himself, waiting for it to make him feel better. Ho-min caught up with the guy from the ambush, and seeing what happened, told him that he better pour the antidote on his leg, because his leg would be paralyzed faster than it would take effect. Our hero had a very puzzled and tired look on his face. The poison was already spreading all over his leg, and no sooner had he responded to his enemy's threats than the latter flung himself at him with crazed eyes, throwing terrible words about what he could do to him. The boy must have expected anything from a crazy man at that moment, but certainly not this kind of statement followed by an attack. He didn't wait for his opponent to strike first, so he swung at him with a swinging kick to the body. He didn't believe that the antidote could work so quickly. Baek Ho-min was even slightly hurt by such words that it was about the antidote. In truth, however, it was a stimulant, and after such a revelation, the boy delivered the final blow to his abuser. 3 regressions were still watching everything that was going on. 2 of them admired and rejoiced for the guy, while the third slightly underestimated him, because it's not that hard to defeat a hunter. The dynamite from the subconscious world was certainly proud of how he had created the stimulant, but if it wasn't for the power of Baek Ho-min himself, it wouldn't have worked 100%. The Master Wizard himself became a little more lenient and added that the boy's ability to adapt was even better than his. It all boded well for a good start. Allegorically speaking, the people from the subconscious world said it's all about good soil. All we had to do was not let our seedling, Ho-min, die. To do that, we had to put all our strength into it. At that time, a conversation was heard in the tent from which the boy had escaped. Apparently, it was an elder and a subordinate. He was disappointed that everyone had lost sight of the boy. He also asked what happened to the last hunter who was on the guy's trail, but we know he put him on that trail with a brutal reprisal. The old man was surprised because he knew that this hunter himself liked to abuse his prey. The subordinate replied that he probably wanted to do terrible things to Ho-min and ended up getting into trouble himself. The head himself, with a bandaged face from the beatings of the boy, sat and realized that the boy was the kind of person who repays debts, always and most importantly, to the last penny. More to reassure himself, he said that the boy was alone anyway without a weapon, and he wouldn't last long. So he again gave orders to his men to find him alive or lifeless. The bald man accepted the order, but then added that the hunter they found was unclothed. Our hero completely stripped the poor man. At this rate, he would have managed to walk for 5 days, but there is a level 5 tower that takes the same amount of time to reach. The subordinate realized that he would try to get to the tower level to escape his pursuers. A full realization came to the elder now. If Ho-min managed to escape to the 5th floor, he would be hard to catch. With fear and some hysteria in his voice, he sent his men out to search for him, and he added that once he got to him, he'd rip off his seal and shove it in his mouth. Meanwhile, the guy was moving forward. It was probably only now that he was beginning to come to his senses. He pondered his plan of action, but it was clear that wherever he hid and wherever he went, the spiders would not rest until they sent him to the grave. He was clearly aware of his capabilities and that he could not escape outside the tower right now. But there was another solution to the problem. It was to climb to the 5th floor of the tower, where he would be unlikely to be found. He walked some distance and came upon a large cave. It was already quite late, and his strength was running out, so he decided to spend the night there. He settled into the cave a bit and decided to familiarize himself with what he had taken from the hunter. He had a simple oil lamp and a painless dagger in his arsenal. Unlike things created by humans, objects have special abilities. They fall into several categories, but even the most ordinary ones can cost about a couple million won. Items in the superlative category cannot even be obtained by constellations. The oil lamp was not so useless. It gave the cave some illumination, but it was fragile, which was the downside. And the guy's dagger didn't impress. However, it may have had paralyzing poison on it, which dripped from the arrows launched at our hero. The painless dagger is exclusively for doctors and alchemists, because it is used as a tranquilizer. Looking further into his supplies, Ho-min found an ordinary Toblin awning. There was an immediate use for such a device. It could be hung on the entrance for a good night's sleep. Having set up his dwelling for the night, the boy thought it would not be unreasonable to practice his skill. Finally, after last night's gloomy night, the sun came out. It seemed like a very long night. It must have been a good morning. Baek Ho-min had slept well and was surprised that he had managed to do so in such an environment. The wound on his leg was almost healed thanks to his skill. He remembered that he had chosen Dynamite's life, and the latter was clearly not like a normal alchemist. Our hero began to wonder why such a cool skill is on the 4th level, but the guy heard somewhere that the quality of the skill depends on its owner. He said excitedly to Nowhere that maybe he was a genius in that case. The regressions watching him at that moment grinned. The one began to deny the boy's words with anger. With renewed vigor, the boy moved on his way. There was no sign of the hunters where he was, but he realized that they were navigating the tower as if it were their home, and he had to be more determined to survive. He turned to his memory skill again and chose Dynamite's life again. And with the skill of Dynamite, he began to understand what plant is poisonous, what to use for medicinal purposes, and what to mix to get a healing potion. He even knew what kind of plant he could fire up to repel parasites well. Using this skill, Ho-Min could find any ingredients he needed. He could also find the ingredients for ointments if he had to heal his wounds. The boy said excitedly that the forest he was walking through was a veritable treasure trove of potions and ointments, and if things continued in the same vein, he would be able to survive alone. There was an unintelligible sound near him. It was as if a block of stone nearby had begun to move. Turns out it wasn't a rock at all, but a real big beetle. It looked terrifying, and by all scenarios, it moved towards our hero. But it's like the guy was ready for it. He used the toppling canopy that hid him from view to give him form on offense. And as soon as the huge beetle let his guard down, the boy pulled off his canopy and swung at it. With his useless dagger, he struck the bewildered creature hard. Despite the blow, the beetle curled up into a ball and covered all its soft parts with its hard shell that resulted from the curling. And in that instant, the guy thought of nothing better than to kick the resulting ball. And from such an unexpected jolt, the beetle unraveled its armor and fell with a clatter to the ground. With all the strength that was in the guy's body, and with the help of one of his regressions that came in the subconscious world, last he took a wide swing and pounced on the bug. With Baek Ho-Ming's might, he defeated his opponent and plunged a dagger into his body. It was indeed the skill of another from the subconscious world, and it was clearly not Dynamite. Ho-Min himself had sensed it, and it became clear that the chosen life could also change depending on the chosen body part. His hand with the seal began to burn intensely. It's likely to get very hot when you use it, and a significant disadvantage was that the guy couldn't use it for more than a minute. It is said that every skill has a price, and apparently the price of Baek Ho-Min's seal was a side effect in the form of overheating. It was already evening, and Ho-Min was getting hungry. He built a fire and took a bite of his enemy. It looked unpleasant, but it tasted like shrimp. Our hero was delighted with a hearty meal. And despite what was going on around him, the guy braked himself with such joy because the situation left much to be desired. Our hero also noticed that as soon as his skill changed, his emotions changed with it. He even felt humiliated at such moments in the opposite sense. But there was no one to rely on but himself, and the changes were justified by the loneliness. And with bestial appetite, the boy proceeded to gorge himself on the beetle meat cooked on the fire. After a hearty dinner, Baek Ho-Min made himself an armor out of what was left of the beetle. The skill he had now delighted him and reassured him that even at this level, the skill could be useful. In full gear, the guy went in search of tougher enemies, and by doing so, he was practicing his skills. After analyzing all the situations where the seal worked, he noticed a pattern. As soon as he experienced a certain emotion for a specific purpose, the skill changed to a more appropriate one. If he has a strong obsession with something, the effectiveness of the skill changes. An emotional state affects the synchronization rate. A look at the percentage of synchronization showed that with the one, the similarity was over 50%, and with the others, it was a little over 10. Baek Ho-Min was a little surprised by the data, because he used Dynamite and Nameless more often in his life, and the numbers were lower. The life he'd chosen just once, and it was the first time, was the life of the one. And the synchronization showed almost 5 times more than the others. When the seal was first formed, the similarity of the experience with the one was 98%. Ho-Min assumed that the one had probably also had experience changing the seal. And then came the logical question of what would happen if the interest rate went up to 100. Looking at the moon, the guy also remembered that when the seal is formed, the constellations contact the bearer. But our hero was not chosen by any of the constellations. He pondered how the constellations might be watching him from above, and Dynamite One and Nameless, whom he'd never seen in his life, were helping him survive. And putting aside his serious look, the boy cheerfully said that whoever chose him would not be any better. And stretching his hands to the sky, he thanked those who helped him. The only one at this time was watching from above, and was glad he recognized him and was proud of the guy for being in one piece. But then the wizard started waving his hands and complaining that he wasn't chosen. He could have caught the locusts too, and the other regressions calmed him by saying that the guy would need him soon too. Shouting to the entire subconscious world, he talked about how he was bored and wanted to participate in Ho Min's life too. He could even wake up other lives by shouting like that. But the master was hysterical. He was almost crying, claiming that he was also an excellent bug catcher and even knew alchemy. Nameless, seeing such a picture, looked with surprise and a kind of contempt, because at that moment, he saw a child in front of him. And to stop the drama, Dynamite reminded the wizard that he and Baek Ho Min have the highest synchronization. That said, they have a higher synchronization than the others. It is because of this similarity that the young guy does well and overcomes difficulties perfectly. These words managed to reach the one, and he really found meaning in Dynamite's words. And the wizard jumped up and down to clean up the mess he had just made. And the newcomer decided to ask the other if the wizard was often in such a mood. With a sigh, Dynamite replied that this was still flowers and was actually calm compared to how he had behaved with Nameless in the beginning. But this behavior was only due to anxiety. After all, there was finally an opportunity to show his skills, and he had only been called up once. If only it was possible to talk to Baek Ho Min, the one wouldn't be so upset right now. And upon hearing this, the great wizard enthusiastically spoke of communication. This prompted his plan to contact our hero. Nameless did not immediately realize what the agitated master was talking about, and spreading his arms out to the sides, the only one who gave an example. Child endangerment is caused by a lack of communication. However, this comparison of regression was not understood, because it was difficult to perceive it from a single man. The wizard replied that all Ho Mins were single and went to the other world. At this point, listening to the conversation between the two souls. Nameless rolled his eyes, realizing he may have caught a huge spoiler. Despite the fact that the master was interrupted, he continued with an important tone to say that he may not have been married, but now there were many Ho Mins growing up before his eyes. And finally, after so much arguing, Dynamite realized that there might be a way to contact the guy. Pondering further, the one went on to say that because of the skill, they had the ability to influence the guy. To continue, it was necessary to take control of the tower system. This was a chance to expand the regression capabilities. Of course, there will be risks in the aftermath, and it all brings a lot of danger. Nameless questioned Dynamite about what he had said, because it was hard to believe, but he himself did not always understand the wizard's train of thought. But despite not understanding the whole situation, Dynamite was ready to spring into action. However, the plan needed a lot of time to execute and a new opportunity to change the seal. Most likely, such tampering with the seal will not just cause overheating, but will even start to melt the guy's hand. But the regressions also remembered that he couldn't use the seal for more than a minute because of the memory skill. Yes, and right now, risking Baek Ho Min's arm wasn't one of their best decisions. Nevertheless, the one was sure they could make it right. All it took was more determination to create a contrivance. And with an acerbic grin, the great wizard himself, answering himself back, said that the tower often works with improvisation, so this would not be a novelty. Despite the positive attitude, it was not known when this opportunity would come, so we had to start preparing now. And reaching his hands up to the constellations in the subconscious world, the wizard began to do something. His actions began to affect the world in some way. Nameless was frightened by this happening, and wasn't sure if it was possible to affect the imaginary world in such a way. But Dynamite replied that only the one could do that, so he suggested not to distract him and to watch. And in reality, at the same time, Baek Ho Min couldn't help but wonder how little time had passed since he had escaped from the old man. But even so, there had already been a lot of changes to his body. He realized that hunters with this level were just ordinary defenseless children, and he remembered how he took out one of his enemies, how he struggled but was still sent to the grave. But in the chase, those men did not relent. They were fast enough. And since the boy had already had 3 battles and had to hunt to survive, his strength was definitely not at its peak. However, the tower that opened the way to the 5th floor was already very close. And since Ho Min had plenty of things he collected from hunters, it boded well for the sweet pleasure of the hunt. And at the same time, in that very tent, an elder was also angry that a 3rd man had died trying to catch the boy. The old man didn't understand how he could take out 3 of his hunters without the right equipment, and the bald man added that it could no longer be said that he was just lucky. The old man was furious because of such a harsh statement, thinking that he was mocking him. He also added that he had already said 100 times that there was something wrong with the boy, but his subordinate asked his master to calm down a bit, because they are not alone here. To which the old man replied with very unflattering words, with all the hatred that sat in him. And then the bald man muttered that if such disrespect was shown to the senior hunter, then the hierarchy in the tower would be destroyed. And after this phrase, the hunter ordered the others to take the elder to the lower floors. The old man was furious, but they had already taken him under their arms. Then the gentleman angrily asked if such actions meant that he should get the hell out of here. But no, it was just that the man's presence made the hunter's work more difficult. The search was to continue, but without the elder on this floor. With indescribable aggression, he agreed to these conditions and added that he would still follow the hunt. In a calm tone, the bald man thanked the man for his trust and said he would be sure to bring the guy's hands. And at that moment, our hero was already on the spot. The tall tower was right on the horizon. Now he could practice before going up to the 5th floor. After all, the creatures that might be there would greatly increase his skill level. Standing in front of the tower entrance, he remembered that he had heard that once you reach the 10th floor, you can't go back. And as he pondered these words in front of the entrance, his attention was caught by something behind him. Figuratively speaking, the voices of the hunters were at his heels. They were following his footsteps, which led him to the tower where he now stood. The senior hunter's companions were sure that the guy was already on the 5th floor. But the bald man was determined. He too was going up to the 5th floor to get the boy, and he was sure it would take about 2 days to catch him. But the others were a little apprehensive about this decision. It would be their first time climbing to that floor, and once you get to the 10th floor, you can't go back. In a menacing yet motivating tone, the man said that he had climbed up to the 10th floor many times. The guys should just listen to his instructions and everything would be fine. After such a rousing speech, he ordered the boys to go forward and not be afraid. And they all entered through the portal to the floor above as a friendly hunting party. But only after crossing the threshold of another floor did the senior hunter think that our hero had left his footprints on purpose to deceive them. Developing his thoughts, he also couldn't find a reason for such actions in a guy. And voicing all these thoughts in his head, the hunter came to the right answer. And our hero actually came up with a plan. There are parasite tracks on the ground that he's been following to stay undetected. Baek Ho Min realized that with his level, he shouldn't date a bald man yet. Moreover, stepping onto the 5th floor now was also going straight to the next world. And through such cunning actions, the boy managed to avoid a fight. And the hunters were busy looking for him on the 5th floor. Despite the truly perfect plan, the approaching shout of the older hunter sounded behind him. Ho Min realized that perhaps he had made a mistake in not letting that man fall for his tricks. Turns out, the hunter guessed this plan almost immediately, because it's a common rookie escape move. Yes, and if you carefully examine the tracks of the parasite, you can notice his step. Then the boy stood in a victorious stance with his dagger in his hand and asked the man why he had not found him faster if he was so clever. The boy showed that he was confident in his abilities. Such audacity amazed the hunter, and with axe in hand, he said that if Ho Min had told the truth at once, the whole thing could have been avoided. And the boy was not stupid, and immediately noticed that the man had not been so sociable before. Perhaps now he wanted to regain his strength after the chase. And as the dialogue continued, the man would offer the guy a surrender. In that case, he would only lose his arm. Despite any suggestions, Baek Ho Min no longer wanted to continue this conversation. He decided to use his skill. The older hunter seemed to realize that he hadn't been able to negotiate with the boy and drew his eyebrows together. Our hero chose the life of a nameless man who was noted for his warlike skill. In that case, he would have dealt with the man faster than he could have rested. And the battle between the two powerful sides began. Ho Min punched with all the strength he had. The opponent appreciated our hero's skill in fighting and immediately realized that he was hiding his abilities. The boy realized his mistake. He should not have attacked immediately after activating the skill, especially with such a level he would hardly be able to defeat him at once. With a satisfied face, the strong man suggested that the lad simply give his hand, and he would tell the elder that the boy was dead. Baek Ho Min caught the hunter's irony and humorous message in his sentence, and without hesitation, he pulled a bottle of the substance out of his inner pocket and began to greedily pour it into himself. The older hunter was stunned that the guy had a stimulant from somewhere, and the guy took the drug from the hunters he fought and defeated. At that moment, his physical abilities were briefly enhanced, and he went on the attack. Overnight, our hero dragged himself into a good position in the fight and started landing punches one after the other. But because of the stimulant, he was also beginning to feel like he might go crazy from the power. In his head, he was setting himself up to hold out a little longer and take down his assailant. Gritting his teeth, the bald man slowly lost his strength. Ho-Min's skill was helping him well, but suddenly the older hunter swung his axe and sheathed the lad's blade. The boy's eyes were immediately frightened by what was happening. At that moment, it seemed to be the end. Not confused and wasting no time, the hunter made his follow-up strike to the guy. Baek Ho-Min breathed heavily and fell to the ground from such a strong push from his opponent. He felt that his skill was already at its limit. The hand with the seal was starting to sting. The man noted with superiority that the boy had made him sweat in battle. He even had to use his skill. The boy realized that if things continued like this, he could go to the other side of the world. And in the subconscious world, at that moment, the cries of the one could be heard. He was reprimanding the warrior king, who had been called in to help, because it was his task to get rid of the enemy. Nameless innocently said that he was going to do it, but Ho-Min used a stimulant, and because of that, control over his body was lost. Then the master wizard turned his anger on Dynamite. After all, he was the one who had created the stimulant and should have warned of the consequences. However, Ho-Min himself knew about them. Nameless assumed the guy thought the skill wouldn't help and used the stimulant. Despite these words, the only one blamed himself for trusting the other two. The warrior king said with pain in his voice that their guy could really leave the other world now. It really looked like a 30-day curse. After that, the only one checked with the others when the seal for the new summoning would be ready, but it took a little more time for it to cool down completely. Bringing his eyebrows together, the master wizard made a very thoughtful face in response to the regression, and throwing one hand up the main regression, said that it was most likely time for the seal to be reinforced. Others in the subconscious world freaked out. They weren't sure if this was the moment. However, the one has made it clear that they simply have no other choice. He also warned the warrior king that he might be summoned again, so his job was to keep the memory from ending, even if the enhancement process makes the guy's arm crusty. In response, Nameless asked, with a tear in his voice, whether it was even possible to start and end the process at their will, but he could not answer the question accurately, as he had only been summoned once. And despite this, the one managed to stay in the boy's body longer than the others. Such a statement from their partner puzzled and surprised Nameless and Dynamite. But the wizard said another surprising opinion about what it means that there is no limit to use. It all depends on the situation and how much pain they are willing to endure. These words were more of an admonition to the warrior king. Meanwhile, back in reality, Baek Ho-Min was being defeated. With a satisfied look, the hunter grinned at how he was more determined and confident a few minutes ago. And as the fight continued, the bald man even verbally humiliated the guy, saying that hunters should be ready for anything. A broken sword shouldn't provoke defeat. And at that very second, Ho-Min managed to somehow break free, but not to attack. He ran a little to the side and just threw up. He suddenly felt sick. It was a reaction to the expiration of the drug. It was a process the man was familiar with. It was clear that the hero's body was exhausted. His condition was complicated by severe lethargy. It was certainly not the right time for such a thing. Out of his last strength, Ho-Min convinced himself to hold on and hit the ground with all his might. A sudden pain spread through his arm. The blow had been so hard that it had caused it to break. The older hunter assumed that the boy was trying to get rid of his lethargy, but there was also the question of how he would fight with a broken arm. Ho-Min took off his backpack from his back and shifted it onto his stomach, most likely for defense. That gesture made his enemy laugh, and he thought about the fact that the guy's seal had no hidden power. Then the boy took a leisurely few slow deep exhales and inhales. Then the bald man, with the same satisfied smile, swung his axe again and was excited to see when he would give up. And at that moment, Ho-Min opened his backpack, which contained an oil lamp. The bright light from the touch with the axe blinded the strong bald man. Such a glow made the elder hunter close his eyes to soothe the pain of the bright flash a bit. The now exhausted fellow smiled back and quoted the words that a hunter must be ready for anything. This taunt made his opponent very angry. It was smart to intentionally light the oil lamp in an attempt to deflect the blow, but he attacked Ho-Min with renewed vigor. At this time, the boy's seal had already cooled down, so was ready for a normal battle. At that time, Ho Ming summoned again with his Martial King skill. Nameless noticed that the boy was beginning to take a different approach to the battle. It was all because of the feeling of fighting a strong opponent, and our hero ran with renewed vigor and an induced regression to a bald man. He flew with powerful blade strikes at the older hunter. His blows were sharp and crisp. Thoth didn't understand how in such a short period of time the boy had learned such movements. And in Baek Ho Min's mind at that second, there was only one obsessive thought: to finish off the man before the seal stopped working. In the subconscious world, the one was carrying out his plan. But Dynamite was very worried that because of this, the wizard might disappear and never return. But the master was obsessed with his idea, and nothing seemed to stop him. Ho Min had to push a little harder. In the real world, the bald man's pain was gone, and he could see again. He was sure the guy had lost his chance to win this fight. Nameless realized that Baek Ho Min's body was exhausted and could no longer keep up with his movements. The more time he had left, the less time he had left. Our hero's hand began to burn badly again, where his seal was carved. The Martial King had already mentally apologized to the one for not following the instructions, because the boy already wanted to cancel his skill. At this time, the one was in a wild rage, and I can't believe this is the end. Then Ho Ming decided to take another unexpected step. He stabbed his blade into the place of the seal. The Warrior King didn't expect such a sudden action from the young lad. With this action, our hero wanted to dull the pain that resounded in his arm, and that was the move that brought a smile to the one's face. He saw it as a way out of the situation. It was decided that we should not stop there. Excitedly, the Master Wizard cheered for our guy and continued what he had started. The older hunter was utterly bewildered at what his opponent had just done. The boy, however, was no longer dialoguing, but acting. He threw himself at the man with the blade again. The hunter's patience was already at its limit, and he decided to rush towards the guy waving a sharp axe. They met in battle, both on their last legs, but with a very strong desire to win. And in that second, a strange emotion of what was happening appeared on both the hunter's face and Ho Min's face. It was clear that Baek Ho Min was able to win. He struck the hunter with his dagger, and the hunter fell in battle. The strong man lay on the cold ground and was unaccustomedly defenseless. His eyes rolled upwards, and Ho Min, not believing what he had done, only said his name, Kang Kyung-hoo. Realizing what had happened, the boy collapsed to the ground and tried to accept that he had now taken a man's life. There were a bunch of thoughts going through his head that it was self-defense. He didn't want to send him to the afterlife. After all those people were after him. Almost with tears in his eyes, Ho Min convinced himself that he just wanted to survive. He begged for someone to tell him that he was innocent and everything was as it should be. And then something interesting and sudden in this situation caught his eye. It was a notification that the constellation The One liked him. Meanwhile, the people from the subconscious world were happy to be able to connect with the guy. It was their first connection. Dynamite marveled at the fact that the wizard had managed to improve not only the seal, but also the tower system itself. It was a real miracle. And Dynamite began showering the one with compliments about how powerful and awesome he was. And all three of them gave a thumbs up as a sign that everything had worked out through their combined efforts. And in the real world, Baek Ho Min received notifications with likes from the constellations and couldn't believe it. They were praising him. But Nameless said without much enthusiasm that because of this power, Baek Ho Min had almost lost his arm, and the wizard had almost disappeared. And Dynamite cheerfully replied in the affirmative. The Warrior King was upset because he expected a more efficient way to communicate with Ho Min. So he stood aside and was not particularly happy about this way of dealing with the boy. But if they were so happy, it was indeed a great feat. And in the real world, Baek Ho Min was flooded with notices that the constellations liked him, and he was even starting to get angry about it. At the same time, he was flattered that even without seeing these constellations, he was getting countless likes. Baek Ho Min wondered if all the lives in his memory were constellations, and assumed that since they were getting so many likes, they were watching him. Especially after what he did to Kang Kyung-hoo, he's now a real hunter. After a little rest and reflection on the ground, he stood up bracing himself that he could handle it. And turning to the constellations, Baek Ho Min asked if their likes meant that he was doing well, and then asked the constellations to tell him something else. But he got another like from the one. And even that was better than nothing. Once again, Ho Min's wrist began to burn from using the seal. It was all the more painful because he had to stab the dagger into his hand. Turning to the alchemist, Baek Ho Min activated the seal and asked him to suggest a medicine that could help him recover. And after creating it, he felt much better. Lying on the bedspread, Ho Ming marveled that he had managed to make a mid-grade medicine and thanked Constellation Dynamite. And in front of him, he kept seeing the notification of likes. And the guy noticed that the one was literally liking his every action. He originally thought it was impossible to connect with constellations. Now he's connected to these cool constellations that keep giving him likes. And covering his eyes, he thought about how cool it would be to meet them in the future. After literally covering his eyes for a minute, he opened them, and it was already morning. After the sudden sleep, it was as if Ho Min had not had time to fully recover his strength, but there was hardly any intense pain in his wrist anymore. This feeling of well-being was thanks to Dynamite's medicine. Baek Ho Min felt great. Before he could fully awaken, the notifications of likes appeared in front of his eyes again. Ho Min thought that the constellations never slept since they had been showering him with praise since morning. Baek Ho Min saw a plant near him and decided to take it with him. Maybe it could be useful for the Dynamite skill. Meanwhile, the constellations continued to bark. A young guy in an excited mood decided it was a good time to go hunting. But because the constellations kept sending him their thumbs up, the guy got mad and asked them not to put likes on anything. And he came up with the idea that they would send him a like when a guy asked a question and the answer was positive, and if the answer was negative, no likes. It was a very good decision. The constellations agreed to this proposal. The first thing Baek Ho Min immediately decided was to clarify whether they were real constellations. He decided to ask the next question about whether they were in the other tower, since he had never heard their names before. But no barks appeared in front of his face. That meant that they were from this tower. Afterwards, Ho Min began to reason further. Since he had never heard of them, they might not be that famous. Even if half of the constellations disappeared or died as a result of the battle, it didn't change the fact that they were absolute creatures. Was it possible to remain faceless constellations? Baek Ho Min didn't understand anything. In the other world, there were questions about whether this was all they were capable of. The three souls argued about a more efficient way to pass more information to the guy, but it was impossible, because if they did, they would be spotted by the tower. But now they had a very vague format of communication. However, it was better than nothing. And Dynamite said that it would be better if there were at least other buttons for communication like dislikes. Because of all the dissatisfaction, the one became furious, because he was risking his life for at least that much communication with Baek Ho Min. Meanwhile, Ho Min himself realized that with this method of communication, his stock of questions was very limited. He decided to check his synchronization numbers and noticed that the numbers with Nameless had increased significantly. The numbers were so low yesterday, but now they were 91. Most likely the battle with Kang Kyung-hoo was really significant, and because of that, the interest increased. The implication was that in a critical situation, the stats went up a lot faster than in a normal one, or because it was the first time a guy took a life. Baek Ho Min was distracted from his musings by an incomprehensible and sharp sound behind him. It was the Elder's hunters. When he turned around, he couldn't believe his eyes. He saw a huge spider trapping a man in its web. However, it was almost impossible, because there shouldn't have been any spiders on this floor. Maybe it was some kind of mutant. A huge spider was eating a defenseless guy. It was not for the faint of heart, and it was very dangerous to stand next to it. The guys from the subconscious world saw the mutant spider and realized what was going on. All three of them were talking about the same man who had once been Dynamite's teammate. Nameless added that he had the opportunity to touch the core of the mutated spider. He even remembered that the master in the Alchemy Guild wanted to sell it for 1,100,000,000 won, to which the one confirmed the above words of Dynamite and War King. The spider Baek Ho Min saw was actually the boss of this floor. He was called the Black Forest Ranger. However, Nameless pointed out that this spider is unlikely to be the boss, because it looks too young, judging by its size. And even so, it's hard to imagine that in a month's time he could reach massive size and take over the 8th floor, and then become floor boss and cut off the supply from the upper floors. And the Grand Master was glad they caught him now, since they could have already dealt with him, and they started sending Baek Ho Min likes. But he didn't understand what the constellations were trying to say. Does he really have to fight this thing? In the fight with Kang Kyung-hun, Ho Min-woo used an oil lamp and a painless blade. but it was unlikely that the same tricks could easily work with a huge mutant spider. However, the constellations still didn't rearrange sending notifications to the guy in the same way. Then with a heavy sigh, Ho Ming realized that those offers even insisted on fighting the monster. And no sooner had he watched the spider before the battle than it launched its tentacles right at him. Baek Ho Min barely managed to dodge the paws of the huge creature that suddenly attacked. Running a little farther away, Ho Ming tried to catch his breath while looking at the spider with frightened eyes. And at that moment, the boy decided it was time to use his skill. He called upon the warrior king for help. The indicators said that the similarity of their experience with Nameless was 34%, and the increase in scores depended entirely on the similarity of the experience. And then Baek Ho Min noticed that now with the seal, he could see where his opponent would hit. And the guy thought about the fact that most likely the warrior king had already had experience fighting spiders. The huge mutant wanted to take our hero by surprise with each of his blows, but the spider dodged any attack of his opponent with its flexible and sharp movements. Baek Ho Min picked the right moment to dive under the spider and plunged his dagger into its belly. The spider let out a wild cry from the pain that spread through its body and fell to the ground, and Baek Ho Min ran away from the mutant's fall so that it wouldn't cover him with itself. He marveled at his own victory. It was as if he knew instinctively about his opponent's weaknesses. Baek Ho Min knew how to defeat a mutant he had seen for the first time in his life. He grinned and muttered that constellations were no joke. But then the sun blazing down on him was replaced by a shadow. It was a huge spider that rose above his head. It turned out there was more than one parasite. The second one behind Ho Min was much larger. And then the mutant released a sticky web from its mouth directly aimed at Baek Ho Min. Having just celebrated his victory, the guy was clearly confused at this next action of his opponent and let out a loud shout. The spider brought Baek Ho Min to its lair. The web-wrapped boy apologized to the constellations and said that the only way to save himself was to pretend to be dead and let himself be caught. However, Ho Min was lucky that the spider immediately went on hunting. It was a good moment to get out, so the boy decided to activate his seal. Burning through the cobwebs, he began to climb out. When the web was completely burned away, Baek Ho Min broke free and descended to the ground. At this moment, he found another useful effect of his skill. Overheating the seal could also be used at the right moment. Looking around, Ho Min noticed that there weren't many mutants in the lair. That's because all the eggs were empty. And Nameless knew the answer to that question, since the spider led a solitary life. All spiders devoured each other until there was only one left. And that's who became the boss of the floor. Those who were to become the boss switched to their relatives, thus increasing their strength. But apparently, the one who was defeated by Ho Min overcame his instincts and escaped. Now the guy had to fight the main spider. At that moment, the one mentally told Baek Ho Min to check the synchronization indicators. And in a battle, the guy thought it wouldn't be unreasonable to use claws and spider legs, but it wouldn't be good if the boss came back now. And as if hearing the great wizard, Ho Ming decided to check the stats. He wanted to see if it had risen to 100% after the battle with the smaller spider. It was true that the synchronization rates were now over 100% with the Martial King, but it was interesting and still unclear what changed with leveling up. Then a menu with a large selection of level-up rewards appeared in front of the guy. From the listed rewards from Nameless, one could choose equipment, characteristic, memory, or skill. However, based on this abundance, there was a question about what would be better to choose from this list. The regressions in their world were also thinking about the best thing for the guy to do now. Nameless suggested choosing characteristics, because the guy would not last long on improvisation. Despite this suggestion, Dynamite was of a different opinion and suggested choosing a skill. Because Ho Min was being hunted by the people of the elders, and it was not so dangerous on the lower floors. And the only one said that he had to improve his memory. The others made only a questioning look on their faces. And the wizard argued that the characteristics and skills the guy can improve himself. All he has to do is train and earn money, but he can't get memory. That's why Ho Min had to choose memory. There was no other choice. And then Dynamite also realized that their memories contain information from the future. With their help, namely memories, it is possible to strengthen the skill. However, Nameless hesitated and thought about Ho Min's choice of gear. The only one was puzzled and said that their boyfriend couldn't be so stupid. The master was convinced that weapons were only for show. In fact, it is important to have a strong spirit and to practice a lot. The martial king agreed with the words of the one, but still something in him wanted to contradict. However, without letting Nameless finish speaking, the great wizard was convinced that Ho Ming was similar to him and would definitely choose memory. At the same time, Ho Min was looking at the list, and he seemed to already understand the choice he had to make. Extending his finger forward, he selected the one he wanted. It was the equipment. Baek Ho Min said that only a fool would choose another option. At this point, you should have seen the face of the regressions, watching their guy pick the option they didn't even mention, except as an unnecessary element. The only one was furious at Ho Min's stupidity, even though he was sure of the opposite. The gear turns out to be the favorite choice of hunters. Those who become constellations receive a challenge from the tower, and only those who manage to pass it get unique weapons. Tower always gives out items that are of only superior quality, and of course, they have unimaginable properties. And since such a weapon could only be obtained by inheritance, or after a constellation went to the other world, such an item was priceless. And on a full positive note, Ho Min knew that the gear was the right choice, and he waited in anticipation for his weapon of superior quality. Clenching his fists and almost jumping for joy, Baek Ho Min was in anticipation like before the most important event in his life. And in front of him at this second, a notification appeared that the level with the Martial King had moved to the second level and the percentages started counting from 0. The boy also remembered that the constellations hadn't been in touch for a long time, and after his choice, they were quiet. Then he thought about the rightness of his choice. And upstairs, the one was tearing up with anger and saying that the guy wasn't like him at all. Nameless said he just needed more equipment than the rest, calming him down. In the real world, Baek Ho Min turned his head slightly to the right and spotted a weapon in a pile of rocks. As he ran closer, the boy picked up his gear and thanked the gods that he now had something to defend himself with. Then, in the other direction, there were unintelligible sounds that frightened the boy. It was the same floor boss who turned out to be sleeping sweetly in his dark lair. The monster did not go hunting, but stayed to molt in order to return to our hero and eat him. Then Baek Ho Min thought it was the only chance to get ahead of his rival, and while he's molting, send him to the grave before they do it to him. Without thinking, Ho Min swooped down on the huge spider with his superior weapon and struck the first blow. But what was the boy's surprise when he saw that the knife did not pierce the monster? It was too late. The floor boss's lynch was over and his flesh was as hard as steel, and the spider abruptly opened its bright eyes and let out a shriek with a sharp jump. Ho Min bounced back. Keeping himself off balance, Baek Ho Min decided and set his sights on hitting the monster's weak point. And with a couple of jerks, he reached that point and thrust his sword in with all his might. But the blade again failed to pierce the spider's body. Ho Min was confused, as he was sure that this was the weakest point of the mutant. Now it was time for the floor boss to attack. He raised his huge paw and aimed at the boy. Baek Ho Min crossed his weapon and his other hand in front of his face, thus putting a block against the blow. But the impact from a monster of such an impressive size was very strong, and Ho Ming was pushed aside a few meters. Also, from the floor boss's blow, our hero's blade was broken, which made the boy's eyes pop out of his head. Now, the guy only had to run forward as fast as he could to save his life. However, the seal on his hand began to burn. Baek Ho Min had little time left, namely about 30 seconds to defeat his opponent. And without noticing anything around and thinking over his plan, our hero came to a dead end. And behind him was a mutant spider that looked frightening. It must have been the end. And with excitement in his voice as well as anger, Baek Ho Min didn't understand what kind of weapon he was holding, since it didn't appear. Then, what are its unique properties? And it was as if he was heard. The weapons in his hands burst into flames. The Warrior King's equipment was activated. It was perfect timing, because it was at that very second that the spider decided to attack the guy, and with an all-or-nothing motto, he swung his superior weapon towards the monster. The equipment did have unique properties. The huge floor boss was split in half. It seemed impossible that such a thing could have happened. Baek Ho Min couldn't believe his eyes. But most of all, he was surprised that he had done it himself. The weapon in his hands began to fade, and in a moment, there was almost nothing left of the sword. It melted almost to the hilt in an instant. A notice appeared in front of the guy. Now the master of the 10,000 swords was called Broken Dagger again. And finally, the constellations have made contact. The only one who sent the likes to Ho Min. The master wizard at that time said in a serious tone that it was hardly the only opportunity to raise the level. Others replied that the guy had barely survived, and Nameless added that this is one of his weapons, which is useful only when your skill is already honed on other weapons, whether the warrior's weapon is a blunt knife or a rusty saw blade. This superb piece of equipment unlocks their full potential either way. The Martial King regretfully said that such weapons were not suitable for the current Baek Ho Min. Until he gets the hang of it, his weapon will constantly break. Although if the boy didn't have a master of 10,000 swords right now, he would have long since gone to the other world from the monster's clutches. The only one realized that Baek Ho Min was lucky in a way. It showed that he had once again overcome the danger that threatened his life. And with a thoughtful expression on his face, the Master Grand Wizard continued to say that one should only think in a positive way right now. Baek Ho Min kept trying to figure out his weapon that wouldn't appear. He was sure that it was activated by a broken weapon, but for some reason, that method didn't work. However, in any case, he was thankful for his superior weapon. It was the only reason he was able to survive now. With an imperceptible and slightly visible smile, Baek Ho Min looked at the lifeless spider and marveled that he was able to handle it. And at that moment, it dawned on him that he could collect his prey from such a carcass. Then Baek Ho Min ran over to the monster's body and started rummaging through it until he found what he was looking for. It was gold, which had been called by many different names since the tower appeared. However, despite the different variations of its name, it had only one purpose: to change the seal. But once the world was destroyed, gold mining stopped. Accordingly, there was not so much of it, and now it could be found only in one place. For some unknown reason, it was now appearing in the parasites like kidney stones. The guy was expecting a bigger piece of gold, but it didn't matter as he managed to survive and get gold. After that, it was time to use the seal. At that time, Ho Ming summoned the life of dynamite and began to deal with the monster's carcass. He started throwing away things that wouldn't do him any good, but he put the poison iron in his bag. He might need it. While searching for the right thing, suddenly, Dynamite and Baek Ho Min saw something in different worlds. They discovered a shadowy kidney stone that had rare properties. It was also called a nucleus. Dynamite expected the core to be much bigger than it actually looked, and the value of such an item should be around 400 million won. That amount of money almost made Baek Ho Min faint. That's why the numbers were so impressive. In joyous shouts, Ho Min began to thank Mr. Dynamite for such a find. In his emotion, he promised to pray to his constellation every night, exclaiming that Mr. Dynamite was the best. When he came out of the cave, he was still thinking about the fact that he had only made 100 million working for the Elder. He'd gotten 4 times that for one mutant. And then the boy thought about how much money the Elder might be getting for the lower floors. Apparently, he was stealing a lot more than one could imagine. Baek Ho Min decided that he should first sell the core on the lower floors and make money. And after the guy is prepared, he can go up. With the changes that had happened in a short period of time with the guy could basically be avoided with ease by the Elder Hounds. Or maybe it would be better to break the chain and not worry. Ho Min finally reached the tower in Seoul after many trials and a long journey. He was on the first floor. Normally, it takes 3 days, but it took him half a month. Under normal circumstances, you can use the elevator in the tower to get down, and it would take about 3 days to get from the 4th floor to the 3rd floor. However, this option of switching between floors did not work now. At one point, such a convenient elevator failed. And the most interesting thing is that it was not just one elevator, but all the existing ones. But despite all this, Baek Ho Min was in a place where he couldn't hide from the Elder's eyes. However, he thought that after half a month, he might have forgotten about our hero. Walking around the 1st floor, Ho Min noticed that there were an unusual number of hunters. You don't usually see so many here. On the way, the young man noticed a boy begging for alms. And then Baek Ho Min remembered that he used to do the same thing when he was that age. Realizing how hard it is to be in such a position, our hero decided to give the beggar a copper coin. Suddenly, the sad boy showed his grin. He thought that Ho Min had come to occupy his territory and started to drive him away. Despite this unpleasant behavior of the little boy, our hero saw himself in him. And when he stammered about the kid leaving Baek Ho Min's territory, he assumed that the kid was from the Elder. Then Ho Ming turned to the kid holding out a copper coin and asking a question about the Elder's affairs. And he made a condition that if he told him everything in detail, the coin would be his. At that moment, the boy's eyes lit up. After a while, our hero went for a walk further into the city and noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was his old friend, Hyun-soo. Ho-min caught his friend by surprise when he threw his arms around him. His friend looked at the young man with rounded eyes, unable to believe his eyes. Hyun-soo started asking him how he'd been living all this time. Ho-min shared how he almost went to the afterlife but came back. And Baek Ho-min was wondering why his only friend was put in such a place. And with some tension, Hyun-soo clearly realized that he couldn't talk about such things in a public place. And the guys didn't discuss the reasons for this now and pretended that they were friends as before so as not to attract the attention of the others. At this time, that little boy was looking at them begging for alms with a very important look. It seems he said something very interesting to Baek Ho-min. That's why Hyun-soo was furious. Then our hero said that if they left here, the boy would tell the elder that they had united. So he advised his friend not to make any unnecessary movements and to listen attentively. To which the latter, with timidity and uncertainty in his mind, agreed to the terms. And Ho-min began a kind of interrogation. First he asked about the many hunters on the floor, why he's here, to which he replied that the Platinum Monarch had blocked all the elevators for security purposes. Then the next question followed. It was necessary to understand who the Platinum Monarch was. Platinum Monarch was actually a tower lord in Seoul. Her power was like that of a king. There was nothing that could prevent her from controlling the entrances and exits. Baek Ho-min asked Hyun-soo why she had such power, and it was because there were many dangerous parasites appearing all over the tower now. Rumor has it that there is a beast on the 14th floor that is very dangerous and brings bad luck, and no one does anything about the danger. But Baek Ho-min didn't see anyone besides the mutant spider. Then he asked himself another question about what other purpose could move the Lord. And after the guy found out what he wanted, he told his friend what a scoundrel he was. It was a real betrayal to side with those who are after Ho-min. However, Hyun-soo couldn't do anything about it. After our hero ran away, they started interrogating him. And then the guy heard that his friend mutilated the old man's face and ran away. After a while, 3 hunters were injured, a few went missing, and most notably, Kang Kyung-hoo was sent to the grave. This was added by Ho-min himself. However, his friend didn't know that much about Kang Kyung-hoo. He knew that Kang Kyung-hoo had disappeared, but nothing more. Hyun-soo asked Ho-min what kind of skill he had gotten that such events were happening because of him, and he replied that after what he had been through, he thought the only way out of all this was to break the chain that bound him to the elder. And his interlocutor, through fear, asked him whether, based on his words, he wanted to take the old man's life. However, Baek Ho-min thought that this way would solve all his accumulated problems. After saying that, Hyun-soo started to stop Ho-min's thoughts of such a thing with a shout. Because after what he had done, the spider would not sit still since the elder was one of the spider's legs. If you take the life of one, you have to do it to the rest. And if you send so many people to the other world, then the godless paladins will act afterwards. And Hyun-soo continued his chain, saying that after fighting with the paladins, that one would then throw himself at the Platinum Monarch. Despite the really cruel chain of incidents, Baek Ho-min kept saying that he had no choice. There's no way out of this pit. However, that's what Ho-min thought, but it seems Hyun-soo had a better plan than sending the elder to the other world. From that moment on, Baek Ho-min listened to his friend more carefully, because he said he knew where the elder's safe was. It was in his office, in a secret room behind a closet. In it, the old man kept his ledger with his credits and a gold bar. Then, Baek Ho-min incredulously asked the guy if he had only heard about it, suspecting that he wasn't telling the truth. But Hyun-soo clearly said that he only heard about it. But that doesn't change the fact that the safe is definitely there. The guy even went into that room and saw the safe with his own eyes, but he didn't open it. Again, Ho-min asked suspiciously why he wanted to do something so dangerous. His friend argued that the elder pays him pennies, which is obvious. At this rate, he'd never get a seal. So he was already thinking of stealing the safe himself and running away. However, Ho-min was angry that Hyun-soo hadn't told him about it before, but he realized that if he had told it, he would have gone to the grave at once. Now, seeing that the old man is Ho-min's main enemy, he decided to share what he knows, and he suggested throwing the elder out on the street. Without everything, his enemies will do everything and not have to get dirty. But Baek Ho-min said without much optimism that no one would believe such a coincidence. And Hyun-soo didn't think that what our hero was proposing would be easier to execute. Baek Ho-min reflected that even if he were to then run from the spider being a hunter, he would still have to go down to the city to replenish resources. However, running around all the time is not an option. Baek Ho-min was determined to break the chain with the foreman, even if it cost him his life. After thinking it over, Ho-min told his friend that he would listen to his plan in its entirety. He opened his mouth and was surprised that he agreed. There were a lot of people where they were. Most of them were unhappy that the elevators were not working. The Platinum Monarch blocked the elevators 10 days ago, and there have been numerous complaints from the hunters. The sensible thing to do would be to send them out to deal with the vermin, but that wasn't happening. After that, Hyun-soo said that there's probably another reason to explain the elevators being closed. Then Ho-min asked his friend not to broach the subject and tell the gist. And Hyun-soo said that there's no monster. The Platinum Monarch just keeps anyone from escaping. With surprise on his face and in his voice, Baek Ho-min didn't understand who he might be talking about. It was about the engraver the guys were chasing in the beginning, Hyun-soo continued. It was because the Platinum Monarch wanted to introduce a new currency, and what he stole was a coin with just the new design that they wanted to use. The Elder wanted to redeem those coins. Therefore, the Platinum Monarch had no other choice but to close the entrances of the entire tower to prevent the engraver from escaping. Then Baek Ho-min didn't share his thoughts with his friend, but he reiterated that it turns out it's all about the design of the coins. And afterward, he looked at his bandaged hand on which was a seal with the same pattern. Afterwards, Hyun-soo suggested framing the Elder in this way. That way, it would anger the Platinum Monarch and she would look for the culprit. That'll play into the guy's hands. But it wasn't clear to Ho-min how the Platinum Monarch could be forced to act as they had devised. And at that moment, Hyun-soo reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with a look like he was ready for this question. It was the same gold coin with the design for the new currency they were just talking about. When Baek Ho-min saw it, he was unhappy because he said not to take the coins from the engraver, but in the end, because his friend disobeyed, they had a chance. Hyun-soo thought he couldn't do it alone, but as luck would have it, he was in the right place at the right time. Probably hoping for a negative answer, Ho-min questioned him again about whether he was serious about carrying out that plan. However, Hyun-soo's mood was very good, so he immediately asked Ho-min if he was in. But Baek Ho-min's real concern was that things might get out of hand. Pondering, he began to realize that if the Platinum Monarch were to act, then already the Spider and the Elder wouldn't care about the guy. Then, with his hands in a fist, Ho-min agreed to the adventure his friend had devised. At the conclusion of their dialogue, they were very eager to take advantage of the Platinum Monarch's capabilities. First, they had to lure out the Platinum Monarch. Hyun-soo suggested spreading a rumor that the city had a new currency with a new design. However, the young man offered Ho-min to bring him up to speed later and set the meeting for 7 o'clock. Our hero agreed and told him to be careful not to get his tail caught behind him, and that at one time decided to ask a question of interest about a guy's skill level. After hesitating a bit, Baek Ho-min replied that it was a useless level 4 skill. But Hyun-soo didn't believe his friend, because taking Kang Kyung-hoo's life with that level of skill was simply impossible. And having finished the conversation on such a note, the guys parted in different directions, saying goodbye until the next meeting. After the unexpected rendezvous, Baek Ho-min wanted to ask the constellations what they thought about it. And there was a message from the One. So the guy was on the right track. Baek Ho-min finally decided to leave the first floor of Seoul Tower. It seemed like he'd been there for months. So much had happened that it knocked him out of time. As he entered the city, the sun was already setting. He decided to go somewhere less conspicuous. So the guy chose a drug den that is inferior to the public guilds in the guest house. There, he found a small building where he could buy and sell some items. But the seller was surprised that he had decided to sell at the drug den instead of going to the guilds. Of course, the man thought that he was going to sell something illegal. However, Baek Ho-min suggested looking at the goods first and making sure everything was clean and legal. After examining all of the guy's items, the salesman calmed down and asked who the young man worked for. But Ho-min didn't want to talk to the man, so he cut off the conversation, indicating that he wasn't going to answer. Baek Ho-min actually wanted the items, so he offered the man to exchange his items for the seller's items and asked the man to state the value he wanted for it. And since the boy's things were in good condition, he offered him 8,000 won. It was a lot more than Ho-min expected. All because the prices went up because the Platinum Monarch blocked the elevators in the tower. And since the guy still wanted the items and not the money, he asked the men to sell the items for cheap. And when asked what he wanted to buy, he immediately replied that he needed a knife. With a satisfied smile, Ho-min asked to see all the knives the man had. Of course, it was difficult to choose the right equipment by himself. So he asked the warrior king for advice, and it became easier. The seller, of course, not understanding what was going on, asked Ho Min in a stern voice what he was mumbling to himself. But our hero was engrossed in choosing a knife and simply put it aside. And the man looked closely at what the boy was doing and was amazed because the young man had a diamond eye. He picked out the best knives for himself, although the vendor had given Baek Ho Min quite a selection, so it must have been difficult to decide. And our hero at the time was examining all the weapons and stopped on one knife. It was a blatant knife of rare quality. Its peculiarity was that with every swing, it emitted a sharp cry. The seller pointed to the weapon in the boy's hands and said that no one takes this knife, despite the fact that it is rare, and he was ready to sell it for 8,000, noting that the boy had good taste. At this second, Baek Ho Min thought about it, but he was in no hurry to make a choice. He asked how much the knives he had put aside on his left side would cost. Then the man's eyes almost popped out of his forehead at what he heard, and he questioned what the guy had just said. However, Ho Min didn't change his phrase and exactly repeated for him to voice the cost of the knives on the left side. After these words, the seller tried to hide his smile because he wanted to buy all the junk that wasn't worth anything at all, but he said he could sell it all for a little less than 3,000. And with a satisfied face, Baek Ho Min said he was taking everything and wanted to take the rest in money, namely 5,000 won, since nothing would be superfluous. The man did not expect this turn of events. In a situation with closed elevators, he knew he had to save money, and grudgingly he turned the kid down for such a deal and offered another option for Ho Min to take the blatant knife, and that the total would be 8,000 won. At this moment, the salesman couldn't even suspect that he had just been fooled, but Baek Ho Min was happy. And immediately before anyone changed his mind, our hero bought the weapon. And in addition, he decided to take a jacket in addition to their contract. While Baek Ho Min was haggling with the man outside, it was already dark and the time was towards 7 in the evening. Having changed his clothes and acquired new equipment, the guy went to the meeting and appealed to the constellations to be on the alert. Without attracting too much attention, Baek Ho Min carefully made his way to the meeting place with his friend. But then the unexpected happened. As soon as he opened the door to one of the rooms, the other hunters were already waiting for him. In the room, he saw Hyun-soo tied up, who was clearly waiting for Ho-ming to come here not alone, and the elder was standing next to him. In fact, Baek Ho-min had guessed that this was what would happen. Hyun-soo was the only friend he had, and until the last moment, he had kept the intrusive thoughts away from him. However, Hyun-soo didn't understand what our hero was talking about right now, and looked at him with round eyes. And with extinguished gaze, Baek Ho-min saw now a purpose to send his friend to the other world. Hyun-soo couldn't believe his ears and even questioned if he was imagining things. Then Baek Ho-min explained that if he had been able to steal the safe earlier and escape before he was framed, it could have been avoided. But apparently, the old man and Hyun-soo were in cahoots from the beginning. Hyun-soo's face showed either anger or surprise, but it was clear that he didn't expect to hear such words, and the elder began to speak. Indeed, he wanted to use him at least as a hostage. But Baek Ho-min no longer trusted his friend, so the plan failed. It was expected, and the guy didn't even raise an eyebrow at the fact that Hyun-soo even offered to beat himself up to make it more believable, but he just wanted to survive that way. The elder's men were already standing at the ready with their knives and axes. The only thing left to do at this point was to become the devil and survive. The old man saw in Ho-min's eyes that he had assessed the situation and said he would give him a chance to stay in one piece. With a sly face, he said he was offering the boy to work 20 years for him. In return, our hero will receive clothes, money, weapons. The old man even promises to teach him how to be a hunter. But Baek Ho-min reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and made it clear that he had other intentions that the old man didn't fully understand. He pulled out a new knife he'd gotten in a drug house and said that stealing everything in the safe was just an alternative. He wouldn't want to take his friend's life, but if he had to, he wouldn't back down. And he continued that after Hyun-soo, the elder will go after him, and if a spider gets in the way, he'll go after the others. Godless paladins will also lose their lives if they get in the way. And Ho-min didn't forget to mention the Platinum Monarch in that list. However, this made the elder's subordinates laugh. They said that the boy should know the limits of his abilities and not dream. And with a look that was already eager to fight, they didn't understand how such a type could send Kang Kyung-hoo himself to the other world. Despite this reaction, the old man knew that all his men were worried. He was amazed that the boy could change so much in half a month. With a slightly distraught look, Ho-min even threatened the people standing in front of him a bit and showed them not to come at him with weapons. Otherwise, those who dared to attack him would be even worse off. And the elder reassured himself that it was a boy standing before him. He had changed a lot, but he was still a boy of 20. Then the old man, in an angry tone, ordered his hunters to stop the lad's senseless chatter and take his life, and to bring Ho-min's hand after he had done so. And the whole angry crowd that had been standing at the ready with their weapons rushed towards the guy. Seeing the hunters running towards him, the young man also took a fighting stance and decided to activate the skill. The small knife in his hands began to glow scarlet before his eyes and transformed into something. It was the master of the 10,000 swords. It was as if the weapon had been reassembled into shards. A few swings in different directions, and all the enemies grabbed their ears. A bright attack struck all the hunters. The room became dark because of this blow. All the lamps shattered. And after the executed triumph, the sword immediately crumbled before his eyes, and only a fading flame at the tip was left of it. Then Baek Ho-min threw away the broken knife, but also even this short use of it was useful. Our hero unbuttoned his jacket, and his entire belt was in various swords, and just now, the real battle began. All the hunters stood stunned and unable to see anything because of the darkness. The elder was terrified and ordered to find a lantern or do something to prevent him from escaping again. However, Baek Ho-min had absolutely no intention of running away. He summoned the martial king to him, and at that moment, the enemies began to fall one by one. Some lost their arms. Others went to the grave with a knife in their chests. They didn't stand a chance against Ho-min. The hunter elders didn't understand how the guy could see in such darkness, but he saw everything and took out anyone who stood in his way. Baek Ho-min now realized that the body he had trained now reacted to all of the martial king's senses. With his new senses, he can now sense the fear of his enemies, even if he can't see them. It seemed that all the old man's subordinates were already so afraid of the guy that they wouldn't rush in first, but one daredevil did. It was useless, though. Baek Ho-min reflected the hunter's strike, and he too fell in the fight. Everyone was terrified of what was happening, and one man in the crowd finally found the lamp. But as soon as he lit it, Ho-min immediately appeared in front of him and struck a powerful blow that killed all the nearby living. Then another hunter with a tremor in his voice told those still alive to use their skills against the guy, and no matter how hard they tried to resist our hero, they failed. Among the many lifeless bodies, Baek Ho-min heard someone say to him that the devil had descended from the tower, but they were the ones who started stealing and taking lives after gaining skills. After the battle, Baek Ho-min looked around and realized that someone had managed to escape from the battlefield. Slowly walking through the rooms, the guy called out to Hyun-soo and the elder. There was nowhere for them to run to anyway. And in the subconscious world, the one stuttered that it was a record. In response, Nameless specified that taking so many lives in a short period of time was a record. The answer was no. The record was that there were a huge number of moments where Baek Ho-min could have gone to the grave. This was because he often got into risky situations. Dynamite agreed with the wizard, because going to a place where a trap was expected was reckless, even if he was going to remove everyone present from the face of the earth. Sighing heavily, the one realized that Ho-min would have bigger problems after this. A femme fatale was bound to appear. Dynamite added that it happened to all of them. After they took the lives of the elders, she appeared, and then Master the Great Wizard said that from now on, everything would depend on luck. In reality, Baek Ho-min was walking through the rooms of the building and suddenly saw an elder crawling in front of him, trying to escape. And judging from the footprints that came from him, he was wounded. At the same second, the guy called out to the old man and said that he looked pretty bad. When he heard a familiar voice behind him, the elder was clearly not educated. The man turned his head and almost shouted unflattering words about how they were doing to him, even though he had raised and fed them. Baek Ho-min realized that the old man was stabbed by Hyun-soo to blame it on him. When our hero came closer, he asked the man how he got to this point, but the man wouldn't give up. The man threatened the boy with consequences if he sent him to the afterlife. With irony, Baek Ho-min said that the spider won't sit around when he finds out that their money bag has become lifeless, and then suggested that the old man should try to bribe him to survive. And with hope in his voice, the man said that he had 2 gold bars worth 10 gold pieces for one, but he couldn't give more because he needed the rest to run the city. Then Baek Ho-min asked the old man if he really thought the city would turn into ruins after he disappeared and asked him to give up everything he had. Focusing, the elder caught the boy's attention and said that the spider was planning something big, and the whole town would be involved. The shirt on the old man's chest was turning scarlet, and he added that the whole tower would be involved. He said he'd put in a good word with the spider for the boy, and with his skills, they needed him badly. He even said that Ho-min would become one of the spider's legs, and in such desperation, the old man was probably telling the truth. And the man himself confirmed that he wasn't lying because there was no point in doing so in such a state. After Baek Ho-min used the skill again and chose dynamite, Dynamite began to examine the elder's condition. He had lost too much blood, and the light in his eyes had already faded. Unfortunately, even after the constellation arrived, it was already too late. The elder had left the real world. But it was probably the most fitting end for a man like Elder. Walking away from Baek Ho-min's body, he realized that from this moment on, the chain was finally broken. Just as suddenly, a commanding voice sounded behind the guy, ordering the guy not to move and to stop where he was. When he turned around and saw who was in front of him, our hero was as if numbed and could not utter a word. Suddenly, everything in front of Baek Ho-min's eyes began to blur and he collapsed to the ground. With a faint smile on their faces, they held the guy up. It was a very quick job for them. Lying on the ground, Baek Ho-min accurately recognized the uniforms these people were currently wearing. The two wearing dazzling and snow-white clothes were standing opposite him. They were the godless paladins. A beautiful girl came up to Ho-min and said in a very sweet tone that he was such a nice guy, but he was able to take the lives of so many people. At this time, our hero didn't answer anything, but a thought flashed through his mind, wondering if they had already been able to go around and look inside the office. Examining Baek Ho-min, the godless paladin said that if his seal was unenhanced, then either he had become a parasite or he was possessed by a shadow beast. Both options didn't sound good, and at this moment, they used the suppression skill. The young man couldn't move. His head seemed to be separated from his own body. Then the girl introduced herself as the ruler of this tower. She was a platinum monarch named Yoon Seo-hyun. In front of Baek Ho-min stood the platinum monarch. It was hard to believe it, although he was looking directly at her with his own eyes right now, and she began to tell me that she was investigating counterfeit coins that were beginning to proliferate. This was a serious problem before the new design currency was released. She shared that she almost went crazy, but Baek Ho-min solved all her problems with his appearance. Those words shocked the boy. The Lordess would have taken the elder's life herself if it weren't for him. Gently taking the boy's hand, she continued talking. In this situation, one should not think rashly, because the old man could run away, and in that case, the spider wouldn't move. Sweetly, she was at the same time removing the bandage from Ho-min's seal. Taking his already bare arm, she said that they had been able to confiscate all the money earned by criminal activity. She smiled and said he was worthy of praise. But only paladins could commit vigilante justice, not ordinary people. It said that the guy could not escape punishment and save his life. After she saw Ho-min's frightened eyes, he added that he had two choices. One implied his execution by the hands of his mistress. The second option shocked the guy. He had to pretend to be the girl's personal hunter, and pretend that all these measures were taken after going through all the administrative procedures. In his head, he immediately decided on a choice. It was definitely the second option. However, if he does choose the second option, he will still put his life at the complete disposal of the Platinum Monarch for the rest of his days. In such a situation, Baek Ho-min once again decided to turn to the constellations for advice. The Lordess didn't understand his request and thought he was asking her for advice. And then there was a notification that the Warrior King had liked it, thus approving Ho-min's choice. But that didn't make him feel any better, because it meant that the One and Dynamite were against it. Taking a deep breath, Baek Ho-min apologized and refused the Platinum Monarch's offer. But before he could finish his sentence, the Platinum Monarch smilingly interrupted him and continued. Platinum Monarch hunters receive 50 silver coins each month, and for every day spent in the tower, they receive another 10 coins on top of that. Baek Ho-min didn't anticipate such a thing and was discouraged by the offer. The Lord said that he would be given a place to live in the castle and a discount for improving the seal, and almost without thinking, Ho-min shouted out that he had agreed to such terms. With a sly and satisfied smile, the Lordess once again questioned the boy about his decision. Although she knew for sure that after such conditions, he wouldn't be able to change his mind. Realizing that this opportunity should not be missed, Baek Ho-min decided to trust the martial king. Meanwhile, the only one was angry that the guy agreed to the monarch's proposal and added that since she had gone so far, she wouldn't hurt the guy. Dynamite also approved of such a move. But the Grand Wizard did not understand how he could speak like that, knowing what the Platinum Monarch was. But Dynamite had said they'd all been through it anyway, and that was why he'd hesitated at her suggestion. And since she saved Baek Ho-min's life and even gave him the opportunity to become a hunter, so it was an obvious choice. And the only one was sure that there was some explanation for such actions, and obviously the Platinum Monarch would not do something to his own detriment. To which Dynamite replied that they know what's coming next anyway, unlike Baek Ho-min. Then Nameless joined the conversation, and he asked what they chose when they had a similar choice. Because the Warrior King regretted his choice immediately, and remembering the past. The one also said that he was unhappy with Nameless' decision, because if the Platinum Monarch had appeared a second later, he would have gone to the other world. Dynamite shared that he had a skill specializing in chemistry and was a member of the guild, so he was able to avoid such a fate. He continued that trying to clear his seal from the piece of iron his body had undergone a change. However, it was not a mistake. Then the one said that he had gotten a good skill and his revenge was quick. Just because of that, he didn't have to hope for the Platinum Monarch, and Nameless said they were just lucky, but he had to rely on the Platinum Monarch. However, the one did not agree with the Warrior King. He said that he was also a lucky man, because other Baek Ho-mins who failed to show their worth were either in the aftermath, lifeless, or ignored. And don't forget it was about a Platinum Monarch who used people as toys, and when they got bored, she just threw them away. Nameless, of course, realized that the one was right, and that he himself had imagined that the Lourdes could be his comrade. Upset, he recalled that he had quarreled with the Platinum Monarch precisely because of her cynical attitude. However, the Warrior King believed that there was something else to characterize the Lourdes besides cynicism, since she sacrificed herself to save Nameless's life. For some reason, she thought his life was more valuable than her own. The Warrior King still couldn't forget that image of the lonely back. Because sad memories came over him, he instinctively sent a like. Based on everything, it was certain that Baek Ho-min would become a Platinum Monarch hunter, and he had overcome the curse of the month, which said that one could not live long with such a skill. Then they laughed and began to rejoice that Ho-min had done well. Now all they had to do was think positive thoughts. Meanwhile, Baek Ho-min himself was lying on the bed that was in the tower in a deep sleep. Opening his eyes, he saw before him a spacious and richly furnished room. Remembering the events of the previous evening, he realized he had been dragged here, and after drinking some strange tea, he fell asleep. It was probably the most unexpected development that could not have been predicted. Then Baek Ho-min noticed more changes in his body. While he was sleeping, he was being treated. Looking at his bandaged hand with the seal, the boy began to think that maybe the Platinum Monarch wasn't as cruel as they say she is. Then he heard a voice from the side. It was one of the paladins, and he said that Ho-min shouldn't move because he needed to lie down more to recover. In the talking paladin, he recognized the woman who had accompanied the Platinum Monarch yesterday. Then she decided to introduce herself and said that she is called Executioner Doll, and she commands all divine paladins. To which Baek Ho-min reacted very emotionally and even got a little scared, since that name was derived from her being like a soulless puppet taking people's heads off. As an executioner, she became head of the order when the Platinum Monarch began to rule, and she earned a reputation for her ruthless treatment of criminals. Like an obsessed fan, Baek Ho-min started excitedly yelling about how he was surprised that Executioner Doll was standing at such a small distance from him. But this reaction confused the girl a little, and she looked at the guy with a little indignation. Then, on an emotional note, our hero shared that he once saw her sleeping people at a crime scene. That day, she broke into a building and saved 3 children. Barely remembering that incident from her life, she said that anyone in her place would have done that, and it was nothing special. But Baek Ho-min couldn't stop admiring the girl. After all, she was the hunter closest to the current constellations. She was a true hero. However, the current constellations never leave the tower, but the only person who was close to them and to the people could is the Executioner Doll. Speaking happily, Ho-min recalled another incident from her life. When a beast threatening everyone appeared on the 28th floor, she fought it alone for 3 days and received a star for it. To which the executioner replied that he was exaggerating, and the fight had lasted only 1 day, not more. After Baek Ho-min asked her if it was true that she had sent Baek Jo-wook and his organization, who was one of the spider legs, to the other world. Supplementing his question, he said he had heard how the girl had also stopped one of the cult members from poisoning the water supply. But the executioner replied that this was also an exaggerated achievement. And not responding to the guy's enthusiasm and the way he praised her, she continued to reply that she was just doing her job. Baek Ho-min asked if the executioner knows that everyone thinks she's a hero. People have been saying that she is the only executioner who really cares about the people. But she stood her ground and said she didn't deserve such a title. She was just doing what she had to do. And asked the boy a counter question about how he had dealt with the old man and the hunters. Baek Ho-min's embarrassed expression said that it couldn't compare to Executioner Doll's accomplishments. What he had encountered were mediocre bandits that were no match for her fights. Then the girl paid attention to the fact that our hero, judging by his stories, had no accomplice. And Baek Ho-min came to be puzzled that all this time the Executioner Doll had been carrying on a conversation with him only to reveal it. She explained that she had already seen such a trick from the young man himself as he distracts his enemy with a beautiful speech. This really upset Baek Ho-min, since the girl's shyness and excitement was just a cover to lower the guy's guard. And with annoyance in his voice, Ho-min replied positively that he had no accomplices, adding afterward that he really is a fan of hers and wasn't trying to placate the girl that way. Taking her eyes back to the corner, and with disbelief in her voice, Doll Executioner asked if the young man was telling the truth. Then with a smile on his face, Baek Ho-min reminded him that he had been told that the ruler's hunters were exempt from the law. But for some reason, he was still under surveillance. However, such a procedure was a necessity that did not depend on the ruler. In order for her to exempt the guy from the law, the legal procedure is mandatory. It was strange that something could happen, independent of the monarch's will, although the godless paladins claim to be a vigilante unit that does not depend on the tower's rules. Ho-min's thoughts were distracted by the executioner's question. She wanted to know if he had visited the security zone at the edge of Seoul Tower. She also wanted to know if he had visited the basement of the tower. But Baek Ho-min's answer was brief. He didn't do what the girl asked. Then she asked a second question. It was about his sealing skill, because according to the testimony, the guy was subjected to a level 4 seal. With this level, it was impossible to send so many people to the other world, but they didn't find any improvement in the seal. In response to this question, Baek Ho-min said with a slight stutter that he was helped by the constellations. Hearing this, Executioner Doll immediately asked what constellations and what rank those constellations were. Here, our hero was not in a hurry to answer. He thought that if she listened to him so attentively, it meant that she already had some guesses about it. And the guy wasn't sure if Executioner Doll was allowed to talk about the ranks of his constellations. At that moment, there was a message from the constellations, namely dynamite. He gave Ho-min a like to let Ho-min know what to say. Then slowly and a little hesitantly, the young man called out the name of the constellation Dynamite. A strange expression appeared on the girl's face. She seemed to recognize the name. Naively, Baek Ho-min said that maybe everything happened by the blessing of the constellations. But there's no denying the guy's hidden potential, as many constellations reach their heights by chance. And the girl didn't deny that option, but only if the guy was actually a prophet. The prophets were the youngest constellations in existence. They rose to unimaginable heights with incredible speed. However, there was a high chance that Ho-min was either possessed by a shadow or had become a parasite. If either was confirmed, he would be deprived of his life whether he was the ruler's hunter or not. Summarizing the executioner's doll's words, he realized that in other words he needed to prove his humanity to escape punishment. Usually the seal is lost in those who become parasites. However, this only applies to seals made of gold. There were no cases of iron seals. Baek Ho-min dares to suggest that parasites just don't care about iron. After all, gold is much more valuable. And then the executioner asked the boy to follow her, since there was only one way to verify his words. With some tension, Baek Ho-min realized that the next question would already be in the presence of the ruler. As he approached the large gate, pleas for mercy from others could be heard, and a little closer the boy saw that people were kneeling before the Platinum Monarch and begging for salvation. One who dared, with his eyes bound, threatened the monarch to take his life, for which the ruler seized him by the neck with his frail hands. And then the Platinum Monarch said, An Woo-hyun. That was that guy's name. He had attempted on the life of another and was caught in 3 incidents of rape. And then the ruler, in accordance with the law, said that she would atone for all the sins of man. At this moment, An Woo-hyun's eyes colored the blindfold red. His entire face began to look disfigured. The hair on his head abruptly disappeared. He collapsed to the ground without breathing. Having finished the sentence, the monarch said that she hoped that the boy would now reflect on his sins and spend the next life with honor. And then the platinum monarch opened her fist and poured out a few gold coins from her hand into the saucer. The others waiting for their turn to be executed were outraged. They did not understand what gave the monarch the right to take their lives so easily. Then the ruler went to the next man and performed the same ritual. The guy's name was Kim Lee Bin. His sin was to approach and also to take a man's life. The platinum monarch said his sins could not be undone, and she fulfilled the law. At this rate, the saucer was already almost full of gold coins, and the ruler was already approaching the last culprit. The latter's name was Lee Dogang. He was involved in a theft and also the taking of a life. Accordingly, he was sent to the others. When she saw our hero behind her back, she was shy, or pretended to be, saying that she did not want to show such a sight to the young man. The young man replied with undisguised anger, recalling that his name was Baek Ho-min. He guessed that she was deliberately executing men in his presence. Then the executioner asked the lady if she could use the courtyard. The ruler immediately noticed that it was necessary for the interrogation. Puzzled, the monarch asked her executioner about the fact that she had probably decided to check the guy's seal herself. The executioner doll replied that if Ho-ming really defeated 10 people with his hands, then he would not be able to hide his strength in a fight with her. Such a plan was not approved by Madame, and she suggested that Baek Ho-min demonstrate her skills here and now, and ordered the rest of the subjects to bring someone. The godless paladins brought a familiar face to them. It was Hyun-soo, who had suddenly disappeared from the elder's office and definitely didn't expect to see his friend here. The monarch decided to introduce the hostage and said that he was the old man's subordinate and asked Ho-min if he was in the building with the others. Without giving away his emotions, the guy confirmed this fact. There were tears in Hyun-soo's eyes. He didn't understand why Baek Ho-min was now standing opposite him with the platinum monarch. At the same time, our hero looked at his once friend with indifference and realized that he too had been caught that day. Suddenly, there were barks from all the constellations from the subconscious world again, but Ho-min didn't react in any way. Afterward, the ruler took Baek Ho-min's hand in her own and asked her to calm down. Then the notifications from the constellations began to appear even more. Our hero realized it was an alarm. With lightning speed, Baek Ho-min pulled the hand with the seal from the paladin. She was surprised by such an action. However, with a very calm tone and the same face, she asked him to calm the constellations if they didn't want to become lifeless. The boy was astonished at such a request or order from his mistress. He did not understand what her words meant. She came too close to him. Baek Ho-min stood like a pillar and thought about whether this was an appeal to the constellations, or maybe the monarch was just guessing at it. She whispered to him that it was for his own good, unless, of course, he was thinking of going to the afterlife. Again, gently taking Baek Ho-min's hand, she asked him to calm down just like that. Our hero didn't understand what was happening now. However, he could feel the struggle between the constellations and the platinum monarch. There was probably a reason for these feelings. Something was actually happening at that moment. Then, as if finishing what she wanted, the monarch stepped away from the guy, saying with a smile that everything was ready. She asked Baek Ho-min to not worry about the consequences again and share with her about what's on his arm. So he decided to look at his seal. It was impossible. His iron seal had turned to platinum, and the pain that had always accompanied it was gone. Switching to Han Hyun-soo, the lordess began to list his sins, which included theft, violence, obstruction of justice, and of course, taking his life. Taking a suggestively sized sword, she said that attacking the ruler's hunters when they were on a secret mission was a serious offense. The young boy couldn't believe his ears. His only friend Ho-min was the ruler's hunter. However, Baek Ho-min himself realized that calling him a ruler hunter on a secret mission was a lie to save his life. Usually the ruler carries out the execution, but she wanted to see Baek Ho-min's skills, so she asked him to carry out the sentence. Not fully understanding what exactly the monarch was trying to accomplish, Ho-min asked a clarifying question about what he would have to deal with. Then, without answering anything to the guy, she silently threw a huge sword in the middle between the guys. With a satisfied look on her face, she said that there was only one sword, so we should get started. The boys, once best friends, looked at each other with startled eyes at the monarch's words. However, Hyun-soo showed his essence again, and after asking Baek H-min for forgiveness, he threw himself towards the sword. Ho-min was not at all unpleasantly surprised by this action, and Hyun-soo was already making the first swing of his weapon. Baek Ho-min only had time to dodge multiple punches from his former friend. Because Hyun-soo had never stabbed the guy, he was angry and said that if he sacrificed his life for him, he would come to his grave every day. However, Baek Ho-min shouted and reminded him that no one promised to let him go in case he was able to defeat our hero. But even so, Hyun-soo immediately rushed into battle. And just like that, Baek Ho-min was trying to figure out what the Platinum Monarch was trying to make sure of right now. Did she really want to see the abilities he used to send the Elder and his thugs to the grave? If that was the case, then she should have put the executioner puppet against Ho-min. At the same time, the guy noticed the Platinum Monarch concentrating on something on his body. He realized after a second that she was looking at his hand with the seal, specifically behind the seal changes. She was clearly waiting for the moment when Baek Ho-min would start using her memory skill. But judging the situation soberly, Ho-min realized that now was not the right time to use the skill. After dodging another attack from Hyun-soo, the guy finally struck him first. And intercepting his former friend's hand with his other hand, Baek Ho-min grabbed his neck. With that, the guy stopped a series of attacks from Hyun-soo and asked him if he had seen the Platinum Monarch release her criminals, because the Lord was definitely not going to do that. Then he went on and said he'd pretend he'd gotten away and pointed him to the exit behind his back. Surprised, Hyun-soo realized that while dodging Baek Ho-min's attacks, he was purposely moving towards the exit. The guy didn't say anything, and went on to say that when he gave Hyun-soo the signal, he should kick him and then run away while he fell from the blow. Stammering and agreeing to such a plan, the boy thanked his friend for saving him. And then Baek Ho-min signaled for him to act. Hyun-soo kicked the guy in the stomach, and he started to fall from the impact. After our hero gave another sign for him to run to the exit and save himself. But for some reason, at this moment, Hyun-soo looked at his friend with fear and with some other feeling. Just as suddenly, the old man's subordinate suddenly swung a knife at Baek Ho-min again. The blade of the knife went practically into the guy's head. At this moment, an undisguised anger appeared on Ho-min's face. With a fury in his head, the guy repelled his opponent's blow and said that he gave him one last chance, but Hyun-soo decided to do otherwise. Then Baek Ho-min realized it was time to fight, and he ran around Hyun-soo and grabbed him by the neck, and whispered in his ear, thanking his former friend for being so rotten to the end. So it would be easier to send him to the afterlife without feelings of regret. Scared, Hyun-soo still tried to stop Ho-min, but there were already enough chances, and our hero snapped the traitor's neck with a swift movement. Hyun-soo's lifeless body fell stone on the ground, and the guy who had won the battle stood beside him. The ruler stood behind and said that the young man had done marvelously without calling his name. So Baek Ho-min reminded him again that he had a name and should be addressed as such. She continued and said that she had seen Ho-min try to the last to save him, and he had betrayed him more than once. The boy's answer was obvious. Hyun-soo was his only best friend. Therefore, Baek Ho-min didn't want to take his life. However, she did notice that our hero still sent him to that one without a shred of doubt or hesitation. And to this, the guy had the obvious answer, as such friends who constantly want to stick a knife in your back literally should not be spared. The Platinum Monarch approached Hyun-soo's lifeless body and said approvingly that it was so easy, and she liked it all. And Ho-min added that he made this decision after thinking about it. The girl touched the lifeless man, and his face dried up like the others. She didn't judge Ho-min's decision, as many people leave the world when they can't make a decision. Then she turned to the boy and said that an important quality for a hunter is unwavering determination. So he would be a good hunter. However, the executioner was outraged by what had happened. She reminded us that a monarch is obeyed for acting according to the law, and now the Platinum Monarch had purposefully avoided legal procedures. But Madame replied that she was using onerous measures to preserve Ho-min's life and asked for understanding from the executioner's doll. When the Platinum Monarch approached Baek Ho-min, she congratulated him on his victory and said that he was now the ruler's hunter. At the same time, she held out a coin to him. It was like a memory of today. And looking at this coin, the guy thought about the fact that he used to get 1 gold coin after pain and humiliation. And now he got a platinum coin from the monarch for sending his best friend Hyun-soo to the grave. Unexpectedly, the Lordess touched her hand to Ho-min's head, saying that she still did not understand his motive for hiding his skill. And quickly changing her mood, she said that it didn't matter so much anymore since the guy was her hunter, and that was enough for her. As suddenly, there was an incomprehensible blush on the boy's face, and he wondered that he had never felt such a gentle hand. And in the subconscious world, the constellations finally began to discuss what was going on, and Nameless did not understand what was wrong with the monarch. The only one also said that he had never seen her like this before. One Dynamite unemotionally said that apparently the monarch fell in love with Baek Ho Min from the real world. Then the one was furious at these words because they all went through terrible torments. In fact, all of them went to the other world, in most cases, because of her. Nameless was in solidarity with the wizard since he himself had lost his life while on her team. And pointing a finger at Dynamite, the only one said angrily that he had no right to say that because she made him work without rest and was never gentle with him. Of course, all the words said by the wizard were true, and Dynamite agreed with it. However, there were times when the monarch gently encouraged him. Then the warrior king intervened in the conversation and asked the elders to discuss more important matters, such as covering the seal. And the one said it was expected when Ho Min became the ruler's hunter. Once upon a time, tons of Ho Mins were killed due to metal intoxication and burns from unfinished plating. To which, with excitement on his face and in his voice, Nameless said that means it's all pretty important. And he asked the wizard about the moment when Madame took Ho Min's hand and he broke free, why he tried to stop her. In a calm tone, the only one replied that if her plans were only to cover the seal, he would not have interfered. But it seemed to him that the monarch was trying to interact with the seal, and Nameless thought that the Platinum Monarch might be up to something amiss in such a case. The only one did not answer, but simply lowered his head down in silence. That was because he couldn't exactly answer that right now, but he was almost certain that the Lord had not yet learned of their existence. And at that moment, the wizard said that the monarch still tried to look at their world, but he minimized all the risks. It almost made the rest of us jaw drop. With excitement, Nameless noted that the risk was minimized, but that did not mean complete confidentiality. Therefore, their existence could be revealed to some extent. However, the one dumped all responsibility on Dynamite, because the executioner puppet already knew about him. That's why he was shown to Mistress. Then Dynamite howled at that, because the wizard himself said he was the weakest of the constellations, and accepting that, Dynamite let Ho Min give his name to the executioner. And when asked why he showed him to the monarch, the one said that Dynamite is the underdog among the Baek Ho Mins, and who but he would present the constellations to the Platinum Monarch. In the real world, the Lordess was just telling Ho Min that she had heard that the constellation Dynamite was looking out for him. She said the name of the constellation again with a smile, but more slowly and thoughtfully, as if savoring it. After Baek Ho Min confirmed her words, she said she wanted to know more about Dynamite. She confused Ho Min and Dynamite. Next, she decided to ask him about whether he knew about the whole situation with his hand. Most likely, with such a question, she wanted to ask specifically about Baek Ho Min's seal. And the Lordess went on to say that a seal that is not made of gold can threaten his life, and until his hand is separated from his body, the poisonous metal and the burns will destroy him. The guy looked at his hand, and the Platinum Monarch kept saying that even though Ho Min was doing well with it, but it was impossible to keep burning his hand like this in every fight. Bowing his head, he agreed with the girl and replied that he fully understood the state of his seal. Earlier, the monarch had applied a coating to the guy's arm, and because of that, the spread of poison through Ho Min's body was stopped, and the use of the seal increased in time. Then Baek Ho Min suggested that now, after such machinations of the monarch, his seal would heat up more slowly. But she said she couldn't stop the heating because it was his fee for using the skill, and the time to use the seal increased from 1 minute to 2. Admiring Baek Ho Min thought that not only had the lady saved his life and made him her hunter, she had also strengthened his seal. In a way, she was a savior to the boy. Then he shyly thanked her. But for such generosity on her part, it was worth fearing the Lord more, because there had to be some explanation for her actions. It wasn't just out of the goodness of her heart. Then she said she wanted to see his skill for herself. But as she put it, she didn't forcefully take the bone from her dogs. And the Platinum Monarch said that if the guy wanted to, she could strengthen his seal. Baek Ho Min was very surprised at such a suggestion and even asked again, and the mistress responded positively. The only thing was to ask permission from the constellations. And smoothly, she began to ask about Dynamite. Slowly, Ho Min told her everything he knew about Dynamite, but Madame wanted to know more. After his story, the boy realized that the mistress was not pleased. The boy realized that the Lord was displeased because there were many inconsistencies in his story, because he could not mention the others. And she once again questioned the guy about the constellation, specifically about whether dynamite was helping the guy pro bono. Very few words, and clearly the guy responded positively to the question posed from the girl. After thinking a bit about everything she had just learned, the Platinum Monarch did not ask the young man more about the constellation. Then the monarch asked Baek Ho-min if he knew that all the elevators in the tower were closed. Of course, he said that he knew what was going on, and that the first floor was very crowded. She said it was a safety precaution, because there was some kind of huge anomaly in the tower recently. And that caused Baek Ho-min to once again ask again what kind of anomaly he was talking about. The Lordess went on to say that several unknown constellations had recently been sighted. After that, Baek Ho-min was even more surprised and couldn't believe what the girl said. You can't become a constellation until you have 5 stars. And with that comes fame and respect. So far, all the constellations that have appeared this way. It makes it hard to believe that constellations unknown to anyone appeared on their own. At this narration, Baek Ho-min asked a question about the name of these constellations. But no matter how much they tried to find out, the paladins could not find out. However, the Platinum Monarch had suspicions that one of the unknown men was named Dynamite. And after saying this, she asked Ho-min what he thought about it. The boy's face showed that he was confused by this statement, but he told the lady that he was not sure if her guess was true. Such a response didn't make the Platinum Monarch too happy. She clearly expected Baek Ho-min to react differently. The boy's mind at that moment had doubts about whether he should have told her about Dynamite at all. But in any case, after the appearance of the unknown constellations, the tower underwent structural changes, and the Monarch's men have already investigated it. Then Baek Ho-min decided to ask again about what he had heard, namely, what structural changes the Lord was talking about. She said that those parasites that started to appear should exist on the upper floors, and after the change, they started appearing on the lower floors. That meant things were out of control. Because of these changes, it was dangerous to use the elevators, so the monarch decided to close them down. Baek Ho-min thought it was because of the design of the new currency. But after Madame's story, it became clear that it was something else, and it didn't seem like she was lying. She didn't understand the reason for the unknown constellations, but she hoped that such changes were for the better. Then Platinum got up from her chair and said that one of her hunters had returned from the investigation and complimented that he would teach her everything Baek Ho-min needed to know. A question popped into the boy's head, because he thought he was the ruler's only hunter, and now it turned out he wasn't. There were several other prominent people, and she introduced one of them to the guy. His name was Kang Ha-jin. He was the same age as Baek Ho-min, but he was already older in rank. After introducing the guys to each other, she asked Kang Ha-jin to teach Baek Ho-min the basics for a ruler hunter. He said he had to do it again. The senior hunter had been working for the Platinum Monarch for about 2 years now. Therefore, Baek Ho-min had a lot to learn from him, which meant he'd been a hunter since he was a teenager, and the guy thought he'd be the youngest one here. The Lord hoped that the boys would become friends with each other, and in principle, Ho-min had no reason not to be friendly with him. And with a smile on his face, our hero held out his hand to Kang Ha-jin, saying that he would now be under his care. However, the older hunter was not so positive and simply ignored Baek Ho-min's gesture, then caused the guy inside to become aggressive. The boy did not keep silent and voiced his thoughts about what his new teacher didn't seem to like. The Lord replied that he was just shy. However, Ho-min was sure that he was not just shy, but openly showed that he did not intend to communicate with him, especially not on a friendly note. One way or another, Kang Ha-jin had to give all the details to be a good hunter. But since Baek Ho-min was still weak, he needed training. This confidence in Ho-min's strength measurement did not please him. However, the Lord insisted that the boy needed to build up his strength. Then she told our hero to show his worth by becoming stronger, and also to show his strength and prove that he could do her bidding. After the Platinum Monarch's instruction, Kang Ha-jin took our hero somewhere. Baek Ho-min couldn't take it anymore and said that he didn't even bother to say hello to the guy. And the older hunter suddenly turned around after Baek Ho-min's claims. Those words seemed to hurt the young man. But without answering, Kang Ha-jin stopped and pointed to the door next to them with the words that Baek Ho-min would live here. The older hunter realized from the boy's reaction that he liked his new home. The older hunter realized from the guy's reaction that he liked his new home. Baek Ho-min rushed to his bed and marveled at how soft and fluffy the blanket was. And the room itself was clean and cozy. Of course, anyone would like it. Afterward, Kang Ha-jin started talking and said that he heard Baek Ho-min received a platinum plating from the monarch. And Ho-min, still smiling and stroking his blanket, answered positively to the question asked of him. And the hunter himself had been wearing a patch over one eye all this time. And now he lifted it up and told Ho-min not to think he had received a gift. There was a platinum seal on the hunter's eye, and added that Baek Ho-min should not delude himself like all those who were here before him. Before this, our hero had heard that a seal could be carved on any part of the body, but Kang Ha-jin had one in his eye, which was very surprising. The hunter suddenly started saying that 1 platinum coin was equal to 10 gold coins. It didn't fit at all with the conversation that was going on now between the guys, and Ho-min didn't understand anything. And he went on to say that the value of the coin did not mean that it would be that valuable in reality. If the coin is used in the same way as gold, they are about the same weight. However, Baek Ho-min still didn't understand why all this talk from Kang Ha-jin. Then the chief hunter said, "You can get gold from the tower, but not platinum. Only a platinum monarch can create it. Therefore, platinum is not distributed, but is used for some purposes, for example, as a catalyst in rare alchemy. Therefore, its value is higher than gold." Baek Ho-min understood why platinum cost 10 times as much. There were always those who wanted something extravagant. Looking at his hand with the seal, Baek Ho-min thought that if platinum was the symbol of a monarch, there would be those who wanted the platinum to match their authority. At that time, the senior hunter also said that he heard that it took 3 platinum coins to seal Baek Ho-min. That surprised the guy. Complimenting what Kang Ha-jin said, another such coin was used to buy medicine for his treatment. In Baek Ho-min's mind, the thought passed through his mind that he had received 1 gold piece in 10 years of work. And now he was 400 years in debt in a matter of days. Finally answering the hunter's questions, our hero timidly said that he had not asked for all this, so it seemed unnecessary to pay for it. But as long as Baek Ho-min is the ruler's hunter, there's no need to pay. Such wording didn't reassure the guy because it wasn't clear what would happen if he stopped being the monarch's hunter. Then Kang Ha-jin started suddenly listing all of Baek Ho-min's organs and body parts. It was for a reason, because if he stopped being her hunter, she'd trade all his debts for every gram of the guy's body. And in that minute, he remembered what had happened to those executed men and realized that one accident could turn him into those lifeless men. The senior hunter then said that at this rate, there was no point in hiding his abilities. Therefore, Baek Ho-min needed to give his best and show his worth to the Platinum Monarch. By order of the ruler, the chief hunter must be with our hero all hours of the day. And he asked to treat him with respect, as his report of the guy practically decided Ho-min's fate. After these words, it became clear why there were 2 beds in the room instead of 1. He wasn't happy about what was happening to Baek Ho-min, especially the fact that he would have to live with that hunter. Then Dynamite said that they had met Kang Ha-jin themselves, so now it was a familiar face to them. And Nameless said that even if he was paranoid, he still proved to be a good comrade. Afterward, he asked the others what kind of person Kang Ha-jin was. And on this, the one in Dynamite did not agree with Nameless, because their version of the older hunter was a stalker loan shark and various other not-so-nice personalities. However, the Master Wizard was not interested in Kang Ha-jin, but in the structural changes he had never seen before. Agreed Dynamite, as it was indeed an unusual phenomenon. But the one guessed what the explanation for such phenomena might be, and it was them. Then the wizard began to show the others what the stars usually looked like, and then he showed how they've changed with their appearance. Before, the stars were all scattered, but now they're all clustered together. They said that these were their star signs, and because of the rebirth, they disappeared from the world, but their star did not. And Dynamite says, it was no surprise that people were shocked by this, because they saw constellations that don't exist. In the sky, Nameless saw a constellation of 8 stars. It was the constellation of Dynamite. The Warrior King was amazed that Dynamite was a creature of the 8-star class. Dynamite noticed a constellation of 7 stars nearby. It was the constellation of the Warrior King. But Dynamite knew this because he had observed Nameless's life, and this he himself realized. And there was one last constellation in the sky that looked like a huge cluster of stars. It was the constellation of the One. Nameless thought about how amazing it was, but he couldn't even count how many stars there were. Then Dynamite said that if the constellations were the cause of the changes, then it was impossible to predict further changes. The one was of the same opinion, because the monarch assigned Kang Ha-jin to watch Ho Min. That meant the guy would get a job soon. And Dynamite added that when the Lord sees a man with potential, she tests him for strength by all means. So it was clear that our hero would have a hard time. Besides now, this hunter was now fully determined to get rid of Baek Ho Min, just as the doll executioner would be looking for an opportunity to execute him. And the only one has implied that the Platinum Monarch will also test the guy until he shows his skill. With tension, the Martial King and everyone else realized that the young man was very unlucky, and no one knew what now awaited them. It was already the next day. The security problem was not resolved until the 4th floor. The senior hunter and Baek Ho Ming were standing in a special costume, or rather a ruler hunter uniform. But Ho Min was very uncomfortable in it. It was a pity that he had no choice. Kang Ha-jin said he researched how the structural changes affected the lower floors, found an area that had undergone minor changes, and returned to the castle. Back then, Baek Ho Min didn't understand much of what his peer teacher had said and latched onto the fact that he had returned to the castle. And the hunter went on to say that his mentor had returned first and that he planned to continue exploring to the 20th floor. Kang Ha-jin concluded his entire narrative by saying that based on everything, they can open the 4th floor. Now they will explore the 5th floor. Baek Ho Min thought that if they went up to the 5th, they wouldn't be able to go back down until they reached the 10th. And the fact that he would have to be with that boy the whole time made him depressed. Speaking almost under his breath, our hero calmed himself. Yes, his companion was no sugar, but if they managed to be friends, it would be better. And the hunter, hearing a yelp from behind, told him to be on the lookout. A cave could be seen ahead. When they entered it, they saw a carriage. But Kang Ha-jin said that it was an elevator and was not available for public use. And the hunter said that this way they could reach the 7th floor, which surprised Baek Ho Min. Because from the looks of it, the tunnel and the carriage were too small. While Ho Min was surprised by such an elevator, Kang Ha-jin was doing something with a knife with a carriage, and suddenly its wheels began to spin, which also surprised our hero. Baek Ho Min asked the hunter if the path was safe, and if it was the right one. However, the hunter replied that he had no idea. That's not the answer the guy expected from his partner. But Kang Ha-jin said that the reason the elevator was not available for general use was because its direction was unknown. He also said they've used it countless times, and if anything goes wrong now, it's because of structural changes. As soon as this sentence was uttered, the movement stopped abruptly. The rails broke, and Baek Ho Min asked if this could be considered a change. Of all the places, the structural changes happened right where the guy was, so their research began. Baek Ho Min was fine with it, but he heard some unknown noise nearby. Kang Ha-jin's face was calm, but he said that there was a small problem. A horde of nasty bugs ran at them. Luckily, they were on the lower floors, and the hunter told Ho Min to fight. Then one by one, they began to defeat the vermin. During the fight, Kang Ha-jin watched Baek Ho Min out of the corner of his eye. After the battle, the hunter asked our hero why he did not use his skill, but Ho Min calmly replied that they had done fine without it. With a bit of surprise, Kang Ha-jin said that if he received the constellation favor, he should use it. He asked if he would hide the skill until his death. However, Ho Ming replied that when using the skill, his seal gets hot. Therefore, he risks his hand every time. Then with a sudden jerk toward Ho Min, the hunter pulled him to the ground, and the boy didn't realize what his partner was doing now. In spite of his misunderstanding, Kang Ha-jin said he watched the young man fight the parasites, and Ho Min fought as recklessly as if he had more than one life. The ruler might have appreciated such courage, but the hunter did not. Baek Ho Min didn't say anything in response. He only asked through gritted teeth for him to take his hand off his head. But the man went on and said that many of the ruler's hunters had not worked for a year. All had been sent to the other world, or had been banished. In 2 years, he had buried more than 5 of those who came after him. One of his apprentices was killed by a parasite, and another was eaten in front of the hunter, all because he was unable to defeat the fellow who had become a parasite. And Kang Ha-jin said he'd already seen those who hid their skills. All experienced hunters died from parasites, not from anything else. Lying on the ground, Baek Ho Min realized that he was telling the truth. Everyone in their own field suffers from something. But after spending his life on the streets, Ho Min knew another valuable thing. Most people die because of the greed of others. Therefore, trusting others, Baek Ho-min couldn't be trusted right now, no matter who the monarch or hunter standing opposite him was. Looking at his hand with the seal, he realized that it was impossible to carelessly use his skill or talk about constellations. And of course, this hunter wasn't trustworthy, but Nameless thought Baek Ho-min was hiding too much. However, the one in Dynamite supported Ho-min's tactics. It would be much better if he didn't blab about the constellations, especially when it comes to Kang Ha-jin. Dynamite said that the memory skill is an amazing ability for them, and for others, it's crazy. And if Baek Ho-min talks about memories he didn't have, the others will suspect something. Then, Nameless asked a question, not understanding what Dynamite meant by the word suspected. And Dynamite blurted out that they would suspect the fact that Baek Ho-min can be reborn. But the Warrior King didn't see that as a problem, since if others found out about this guy, he could become famous and gain strong allies. There really was a problem. Dynamite said that the Platinum Monarch could recognize it, and if the situation didn't match her expectations, she would just start over. Nameless's eyes rounded sharply, and he asked the man if he thought the Monarch could send Ho-min to the other world. The one intervened and said that he didn't want to believe it, but the Lord was a genius. She has learned many times that Baek Ho-min can be reborn. That's why the wizard thought he couldn't mess with her. If she found out about the guy's skill, she would try to steal his skill or use the carrier for her own benefit. And the current Ho-min was most likely hiding his skill instinctively to stay alive no matter what. Meanwhile, Kang Ha-jin was trying to convince Baek Ho-min to start using his skill already, if he wanted to live more than 1 year compared to the others, and he said not to underestimate other hunters, to which our hero replied that he wouldn't even think of such a thing. With anger in his voice, Baek Ho-min said that he would survive and climb to the top of the tower. After that, he would use his skill wherever and whenever he wanted. Then Kang Ha-jin said that he was weak and he hoped Ho-min would leave of his own accord, and added that he wouldn't be the ruler's hunter. Such a brazen, sudden, and bold statement from a guy discouraged our hero, and Kang Ha-jin told him to leave the tower and the castle. He will in turn inform the governor. He added that if Ho-min cared about the debt, he would pay it back. At this second, Baek Ho-min broke free from the hunter's hand and struck out with anger, because he was talking nonsense while our hero was fighting for his life. The guys had a mutual dislike, so an attack followed from Kang Ha-jin as well. But Baek Ho-min intercepted his opponent with words about who he was to order him to get out of here. Kang Ha-jin's eyes filled with anger as he dared to rebel against his mentor. This was now a good reason to kick Ho-min out. After saying that, Baek Ho-min wanted to attack the guy again, but he saw a cliff behind him that was probably caused by structural changes. He started to warn Kang Ha-jin about it, but he didn't believe the guy's words, and the two of them rushed downstairs. With a wild scream, they fell into the abyss and seemed to have forgotten that they had just wanted to send each other to the other world. They fell to the ground with a thud. Kang Ha-jin grumbled that all unpleasant things happen when he's dealing with another student. Because they didn't realize where they were, they panicked and started accusing each other of staying here for the rest of their lives. Then Kang Ha-jin asked the guy that he must have heard of the basement, or also called the Foundation. But Baek Ho-min didn't understand what the question was about, since they had recently been on the 4th floor. But judging by the fact that the light didn't reach here, they were actually in the basement of the tower, since the basement is also called a dungeon because of the total darkness in these areas. And Baek Ho-min remembered that recently, Executioner Doll had asked him about the guy on the basement floor and whether he was becoming a parasite. After arriving at the base of the tower, Ho-min felt as if moss was appearing on his body. Kang Ha-jin agreed with this statement. The hunter sadly added that if they stayed here, they would turn into vermin. I didn't expect to hear Baek Ho-min at this moment, but it was unfortunately true. This was the place of testing, as the one said. It was here that mankind exterminated the guardian of the 10th floor, 36 years ago to be exact. And even that the structure had changed, he had not expected it to be possible to such an extent. Nameless asked him if he himself had been to this place, and the answer was yes. The Foundation was like the rings that are in trees to determine age. It had traces of past parasite ordeals and disasters, and the more severe the incident, the brighter the mark. And if the guys don't get out of there as soon as possible, they're in for the first test that mankind has ever gone through. And it's just the two of them and no one else, just Baek Ho-min and Kang Ha-jin. Because of the high humidity on the basement floor, it was difficult to gather forces, but it had to be done, because otherwise they could turn into parasites. The guys had been walking on the Foundation for a long time, but they still couldn't find a way out. Baek Ho Min suggested they just climb back up, but the hunter replied that they were in the elevator zone. But that area was like a wormhole in a tower. You never know where you're going to come out. However, Ho Ming didn't understand what the word wormhole meant and questioned the meaning. Such a simple question made Kang Ha-jin's entire face twist. Therefore, Ho Min didn't understand his mentor's reaction. He replied that in plain language, it meant that they could get lost if they took shortcuts, and they would have to speed up, for the transformation was just around the corner. As they walked along the basement floor, Baek Ho Min decided to ask what it meant when Kang Ha-jin said he would repay his debt if he left the tower. He asked why he was so eager for him to leave, that he was even ready to repay a huge debt for the boy. But the hunter was silent. Then Baek Ho Min suggested that it was because of love that he didn't respond. He made the hunter furious with this assumption. However, it was a clever ploy to get Kang Ha-jin to come forward and answer the question. Not particularly cooperative, the older hunter replied that he had no interest in money, which prompted the next question from Ho Min as to why this was so. Kang Ha-jin replied that as long as his strength meets the ruler's needs, he's fine with it. But if she wanted him to become stronger, she would take care of it. Then our hero again put forward the stunning theory that the hunter likes the Platinum Monarch since he does everything for her. Kang Ha-jin's reaction was even more vivid. And pestering Ho Min with questions, Ho Min now wanted to know the answer to his guess, and he said that even if he had, he could have reacted more calmly. It was because the ruler had saved Kang Ha-jin's life. He just wanted to repay her in full. Ho Min's face expressed a sly smile in disbelief. He thought to himself that no matter how he made excuses, he could see that he liked the Platinum Monarch. This was most likely the reason why Kang Ha-jin was wary of the guy who had received the blessing of the constellations. While Ho Min was standing there with a face so satisfied that he had figured out the hunter, he noticed that he was looking at him strangely. Then Baek Ho Min offered to tell his mentor how to seduce the Platinum Monarch. Kang Ha-jin didn't expect such a suggestion. But perhaps such words interested him as he silently looked at the guy and waited for him to continue speaking. Ho Min was sure that the monarch was interested in him and said he could use it to praise his mentor in front of her. In return, he would talk about him as a skillful novice. Thus our hero would prove his worth to the girl, and the hunter would succeed in love affairs. Then Kang Ha-jin turned the guy's waiting face with his hand and told him to stop talking nonsense and look the other way. And to their left was a light coming from the wall. Ho Min thought it was a way out, but the hunter said it was more like starlight. They didn't know exactly what it was, but it seemed to have something to do with the constellations. The hunter said it might even be the effects of structural changes. As they passed through the hole in the wall, they saw a sword in front of them that was stuck in the mirror. They noticed that the sensation of moss growing on their bodies was gone. Maybe it was the light. And they also thought that the place had something to do with the keeper of the 10th floor. Yi Ho Min asked Kang Ha-jin about being the ones who don't let you go up every 10th floor. The guy answered positively, since the keepers aren't allowed to climb quickly to the top. But when they crossed the barrier, a barrier appeared that prevented the vermin from descending. Ho Min said that by taking over the Guardian's territory, it would be passed on to the humans. However, the task was difficult because it was impossible to break them or send them to the other world. But in order to turn the Keeper's territory into a place of people, it was necessary to pass a test. And the sword that was sticking out of the broken mirror was similar to the hunter's item that had defeated the 10th floor keeper. At that time, Ho Min thought that it was better not to touch this sword, although his gut felt that he was very attracted to it. At that moment, Constellation 1 sent a bark to Baek Ho Min, and he thought it probably meant that he could touch the sword. And at these thoughts to the boy again, the wizard sent a yelp. Smiling, Ho Min realized the reasons for his attraction to the sword. Kang Ha-jin noticed that the guy was talking to himself, but he didn't understand why he was doing it. But Baek Ho Min suddenly ran up to the sword and grabbed it with a joyful face. However, Kang Ha-jin's face expressed the opposite emotion, because no sooner had he said, "You can't touch that sword," than our hero grabbed it. As soon as the sword was in Baek Ho Min's hands, it began to shatter into thousands of pieces, and with them, the guys themselves flew off to the side. Ho Min landed not very softly, but the hunter managed to keep his balance and angrily asked our hero why he had touched the sword at all. The light around the sword disappeared, and Baek Ho Min didn't understand why the one had then told him he could take the sword. And then the unbelievable happened. A lot of other Kang Ha-jins and Baek Ho Mins appeared around the guy. No sooner had he recovered from what he had seen than one of his spears swung at him with a knife and a placated face. Ho Min started to defend himself, and after his replica was scattered with red shards in front of him, he realized that it was a reflection. Then Kang Ha-jin said that apparently the guardian of the 10th floor was the mirror butterfly. Such a parasite could only be found in books and stories nowadays. Fighting the reflections, the hunter went on to tell that the constellations had a hard time because of such a strange ability. And when the guys were next to each other, Baek Ho Min asked in horror if he could just smash copies like that, in case he accidentally stumbled upon the real Ho Min. But his mentor thought it was a rather silly question, since while they were fighting with their reflections, they couldn't hurt each other. Then Kang Ha-jin took off the blindfold from his eye and realized that it was time to use his skill to find the main body. At that moment, thin lines appeared along which the hunter was led to the main body. It had already been over 30 years since the mirror butterfly had been defeated, and since then, the skill of the average hunter had improved. As this test was passed in much worse times than now, after reaching the main body, Kang Ha-jin was confident that he could now mop up the parasite. The hunter's skill showed the very heart of the mirror butterfly that hovered in front of him. Then he made a dash and prepared to strike her heart. However, the parasite managed to dodge his attack. It was clear that in this darkness, the accuracy of Kang Ha-jin's punches was very poor. Suddenly, the mirror butterfly strongly approached the guy with its powerful wings, and it was as if he couldn't move at that moment. He didn't even realize what was happening. This action of the mirror butterfly made Kang Ha-jin lose his balance. As he realized later, it was because of its mirrors, but it was surprising that the parasite did not kill him, but went towards Ho Min. Clenching his sword tighter, the hunter thought that Baek Ho Min posed a stronger threat to the parasite than him. Otherwise, why did he turn around? And with a desire to prove the monster wrong, he got up and ran after him, shouting that he would regret his decision. Kang Ha-jin chopped down the reflections one by one, making his way towards Baek Ho Min. Our hero saw such eagerness and asked a little apprehensively if the mentor was all right. The guy told Baek Ho Min that he should be more worried about his life than his own. In the long battle, Ho Min noticed that there was no end to the reflections, but there probably should have been a strategy against them. Then Kang Ha-jin explained the strategy. The reflections were caused by the parasite dust, and until it disappeared, they would continue to appear. And the hunter said that he could ask before touching the sword. And as if with a note of sarcasm, Baek Ho Min apologized to his mentor for such a prank. Our hero thought to himself that he had done it because the constellations had given him a like. Was it a misunderstanding between the two parties? Suddenly, Kang Ha-jin complimented Ho Min on being good in battle. Then Baek Ho Min decided to ask his mentor about what he had seen earlier as he rushed towards the mirror butterfly, but our hero couldn't even see it. The thing was that it could distort its own balance. Kang Ha-jin said that as soon as you look at the mirror butterfly, your vision becomes distorted and you lose your balance. And Baek Ho Min questioned how past generations could even defeat this thing. However, back then, there was a constellation of crushing dawn with the name Faint. At that time, it was not yet a constellation, but had already found a way to pass the test of losing 2 comrades. A little angry, Ho Min asked why he hadn't told her earlier. After all, they had to repeat what she had done. And Kang Ha-jin said that that girl filled the entire space with blinding light and then shattered the reflection all at once. But it wasn't clear how to do it again. The skill of the constellation Fuzzy can only be used by hunters who have received her blessing, or now even an item blessed by her could help them. Saying that, Kang Ha-jin remembered that in this place right now, there was her sword that could help them defeat the parasite. And he started shouting to Ho Min through the crowd to look for the sword. But it was not easy to do so in such a situation, but they had no choice. Then sneaking through the reflections, defeating one after another, Ho Min rushed to find him while Kang Ha-jin covered him. Watching what was going on, the one said with a calm expression on his face that they were finally working together. The nameless one, standing behind him, told the wizard that he didn't think that he would make Ho Min take the sword, as this test had already been passed, and there would be no reward after the victory. But who cared if the 2 guys needed to gain experience working as a team against strong opponents? The one said there would be many more monsters waiting for them on their way to the top, and Nameless couldn't even argue with that, though it was scary to risk their lives for that too. The wizard went on to say that the constellation Rib is very generous to her predecessors, and if the guys are lucky, they might get her blessing. After wading through the mass of reflections, Baek Ho Min still managed to find the sword. However, he had a question about how the broken sword could be of use to them. Kang Ha-jin replied that the mirror butterfly was circling around him, so he told him to wait for the guy's signal. While waiting for the signal, Ho-ming thought that even if he now used the 10,000 Sword Master, it wouldn't be easy to fill this place with light. And while Baek Ho-min was busy thinking, a mirror butterfly flew up to him from behind. Kang Ha-jin noticed this, and that's when he shouted at Ho-min to turn around and hit 10 o'clock. Not believing that she was already so close to him, Baek Ho-min turned around and faced the mirror wing of the parasite. At that moment, the guy also lost his balance. Kang Ha-jin shouted from behind that he warned him not to look at her, or his vision would be distorted. Slowly getting up from his knees, Ho-min said that this was the first time he had felt such a thing on himself. But when he got to his feet, there was no longer a mirror butterfly in front of him. She was gone from his sight. Then the young man thought about the fact that Kang Ha-jin couldn't use Raibi's sword, and he himself couldn't see where the parasite was, and he had an idea on how he could solve this problem. Walking almost right up to Kang Ha-jin, Ho-min asked Kang Ha-jin to look at him while taking his head with both of his hands. It sounded strange from Baek Ho-min's mouth, but he wanted to use his mentor's gaze to find the monster. Kang Ha-jin was discouraged by such a request. However, finding the mirror butterfly with only the hunter's gaze was difficult, but Ho-ming realized that if he couldn't do it, the martial king would handle it. Then Baek Ho-min decided to use his memory skill, and behind his back appeared the very wrong person he wanted to summon. Enraged, Ho-ming began to scream in his head at what had happened. After all, he needed the attacking abilities of the Nameless One and the master of the 10,000 swords. And the one appeared. But the master wizard was happy about this development. He had waited a long time for this moment when his time would come. And with a slightly sinister smile, the only one showed Ho-min with a pointing gesture for Ho-min to act, and with the same gesture, the boy's body immediately stirred. In Ho-min's mind, a voice said that this trial was hard to call such a trial, and that the elders were trying their best to pass it. And the boy thought it was the voice of the One. The voice kept saying that taking the first step is difficult, but following already trodden footsteps is easier. A second later, Baek Ho-min began to recognize the voice of the Platinum Monarch in the speaker. At the same time, Kang Ha-jin was standing in front of the guy who didn't understand what was going on. He couldn't move and asked Ho-min what he was doing to him. And the hunter at that moment had a thought that he could somehow control his seal. After looking around, Kang Ha-jin realized that the mirror butterfly and its reflections couldn't move either. Then there was a question about Ho-min's skill. Then the One revealed the secret of this trick. A mirror butterfly was caught in the hunter's eye. When it distorted his vision, it could not move while being looked at. The only way the parasite can move is in the dark when it can't be seen. And reminded that the constellation Rib to win filled all space with light. With still the same sinister and sly face, the master wizard said that, but he is not like Rib. Recalling the monarch's words in his head a few minutes ago, Ho-ming thought of a different method for catching the insect. And it was a very simple allegory about swatting him with a fly swatter. Then Ho-ming just squeezed his two fingers as if he was about to snap, and the mirror butterfly like magic actually swatted. Unable to move, Kang Ha-jin saw what was happening to the parasite and was shocked. After that, Baek Ho-min had noticed that life was changing, and the warrior king replaced the One. Grabbing the blessed sword in his hands, our hero asked Kang Ha-jin not to take his eyes off the butterfly right now. And the older hunter was still as bewildered by what was happening around him now. With a determined voice, Baek Ho-min replied to the mentor that they must defeat the parasite before it escaped. Thanks to the 10,000 Swordmaster, the weapon in Ho-ming's hands lit up with a dazzling light for the entire space. And Ho-ming made a victory swing that shattered the mirror butterfly into thousands of small shards. The room cleared again from such a bright light. Ho-min lay unconscious on the ground, and beside him was a sword that shone less brightly. Slowly the boy opened his eyes and lifted himself up, realizing that it was all real. Only he didn't understand where everyone had gone. Next to him was the sword he was now fighting with, but it was sticking out of the mirror again, just as it had when they first came to this place. Everything was back to the way it was, and without believing his eyes, Ho-min saw something unreal. In front of the sword stood Ryab herself, only in the form of a ghost. Only it seems that Baek Ho-min didn't recognize her as the hero who invented a way to defeat the mirror butterfly. Meanwhile, the girl smiled sweetly and gave the guy a thumbs up. It was her blessing. Baek Ho-min immediately looked at his hand with a seal with a questioning expression. The blessing of the constellation was called Light. It gave the ability to utilize starlight by absorbing its strength. Of course, Baek Ho-min was pleased with such a reward, but he felt that compared to other abilities, this one was too simple compared to the blessings of other hunters. But still, the guy thought he wouldn't need a lamp. Only Baek Ho-min thanked Constellation Rib for such a blessing, as he suddenly noticed that she had already disappeared. In front of his eyes was still Maya, but without the girl hovering next to him. After that, there was suddenly a notification already from his constellations. It was the one who sent the likes to Ho-min. Then the guy thought that if the one sent him a like, then the blessing wasn't so bad. But our hero kept thinking that he heard someone's voice during the battle, and it seemed to him that the one was already on the basement floor with the Platinum Monarch. And if that was true, then perhaps the Monarch knew something about the one. Though Ho-min thought it was strange that such a powerful constellation as the Wizard was unknown, as he instantly took control of Kang Ha-jin's seal and easily caught the mirror butterfly. After everything that had happened to Baek Ho-min, he now had a clear understanding of what the foundation was. And he said that the surface was where all history is written, and the foundation where the past is repeated. And it was even more understandable why the basement floor could easily turn into a parasite. Then Baek Ho-min remembered about the synchronization values and decided to look at them. After the battle with the mirror butterfly, the values with the one had simply skyrocketed. The joyful Baek Ho-min had expected this after the fight, and next time, the level with the one was bound to rise. At that moment, our hero finally remembered that he was not alone. He wondered where Kang Ha-jin had gone, and a little regret that he still saw his skill. He remembered that he had touched his seal, and it wouldn't have been surprising at all if he had tried to attack him and send him to the other world. However, the hunter simply ran away. And by the way, as soon as Baek Ho-min left that place, the feeling of moss growing on his body immediately returned. Then he decided to use Raibi's blessing, and for that, he took his cheapest knife, since the new skill reduced the strength of the weapon he was using. The blessing of the constellation was light. Therefore, after using it, the weapon in Ho-min's hands glowed. The feeling of moss on the guy's body was gone immediately, because the light was unusual and starry. In simple words, thanks to this blessing, Ho-min had eliminated the possibility of becoming a parasite. He could now walk on the foundation with ease. And now Ho-min understood why the one was pleased with acquiring such a skill. He was very useful in this situation. Suddenly, Kang Ha-jin called out to Ho-min from behind. With that sudden call, the guy was startled. Apparently, Kang Ha-jin had also received the blessing of the constellation Rib. However, the hunter said that he had gotten the night vision skill. And because Baek Ho-min defeated the mirror butterfly, his skill was better. Baek Ho-min now realized that Kang Ha-jin hadn't actually escaped, but was just looking around on the basement floor. And the hunter himself said that the constellation Rib was very generous to her predecessors. And if she were alive now, she would be a role model. But Ho-min was surprised by this wording, because he had recently seen her standing next to the sword. However, Kang Ha-jin said that the constellation Rib had ascended 16 years ago, and ascended constellations can't appear in their appearance to humans. Then Baek Ho-min realized that they couldn't see the lifeless constellation, but he could still see the girl, even though it was in a dim light. But Kang Ha-jin did not believe our hero, and said that he was probably dreaming because he had been looking at his reflection for a long time. And he said he had to go because, while he was looking around, he found the rails, and the two of them went on their way. And Baek Ho-min was worried at this moment that Kang Ha-jin was too calm. Even though he saw our hero's skill, he wasn't going to ruin it. And just when he should have thought of that, Kang Ha-jin gushed about what had happened. This start of the conversation frightened Baek Ho-min, and he thought that something bad was about to happen. The hunter continued and said that the victory was thanks to Ho-min, and he thanked the boy without turning to face him. At that moment, it was unclear what surprised Ho-min more, that it was the first time he had thanked him, or that he hadn't mentioned what he had seen. Baek Ho-min smiled and asked Baek Ho-min to repeat the same words while looking at his face as if he hadn't heard. This way, he was asking for compliments. However, Kang Ha-jin was clearly not going to say it again, saying that they needed to hurry and let there be a long way to go. But Baek Ho-min was persistent. They reached the tower at this pace. The whole journey took them about a week, and Kang Ha-jin was ready to give his report about Ho-min to the monarch standing before them and carrying out another execution. And in his head, Baek Ho-min imagined that now the hunter would say that it wasn't easy, but working with Ho-min wasn't bad. However, the reality was different. The hunter said that the guy was useless, and his actions were disorderly and impulsive. And also, that Ho Min could put his squad in danger because of that. And the mentor added that immediate execution and platinum extraction would be the best solution. Baek Ho Min was furious at what he heard. After listening to Kang Ha Jin, the Platinum Monarch turned to our hero and wanted to listen to him. Since this was his first entrance as a hunter, with hatred and for revenge, Ho Min said that Kang Ha Jin's help was less than the stone. But even so, he was still a senior hunter. From what the two boys said, the ruler concluded that the boys got along. However, they shouted out loud that they didn't, so she told Ho Min to go inside the castle and rest. With a possessed smile, Baek Ho Min dreamed of a deep sleep and a warm shower. In the background, Kang Ha Jin realized that apparently his report wasn't that important to the monarch, to which she replied to him that her order to observe him was not to evaluate the guy's performance. But Kang Ha Jin insisted that our hero didn't belong here and that he could defame the name of the Platinum Monarch. At the time, the monarch couldn't just throw the guy out and leave him as a stray dog, even if everything the hunter said was true. And the hunter replied that keeping Ho Min tied up was not the answer. He would escape anyway. And if he doesn't, the executioner puppet will leave him headless. With a mysterious face, the Platinum Monarch said to Kang Ha Jin not to worry about the executioner. The expression on her face, or rather her smile, was familiar to the hunter. He realized that her thoughts were flowing through her mind, and the girl began to ask the boy about the changes that were taking place. He said his mentor made it to the 20th floor, and according to his clues, the cause of the deterioration was the constellations. Now they're investigating the case further. After hearing this, the Platinum Monarch realized that it was necessary to warn the Guildmaster about this. The hunter replied that hunters under the care of the descended constellations were likely to show themselves. He also said that the constellation Fuzzy was also likely to descend. The monarch said her name thoughtfully and said she hadn't heard from her in a long time, and there was a time when many mourned her when she went to the other world. But the ruler said that in any case, the rash actions of the constellations do not benefit their predecessors because they must stay on top of things to avoid deterioration. After she finished, she went back to the report about Baek Ho Min. She wanted to hear the truth because it was the first time she had seen such an emotional report from him, most likely caused by resentment. But Kang Ha Jin denied it and said that he was really surprised by the guy's skill. He said that if he had a decent skill, he would immediately become stronger. Then the monarch replied that the guy was supported by the constellations and not to worry about him. And Kang Ha Jin agreed with the girl's statement, adding that he noticed the traces of 2 constellations, but they were insignificant, so he couldn't figure out which constellations they were. This mysterious appearance of Baek Ho Min and the unknown constellations, along with the sudden deterioration of the tower, said that all of these were not coincidences, and the monarch understood that. And she instructed the hunter to also observe the boy. Only one thing Kang Ha Jin couldn't tell the Platinum Monarch. He didn't understand how Baek Ho Min managed to control his seal. This way of control was very different from that of a ruler. With so many questions arising, the hunter had another one about who Baek Ho Min was. At the same time, Ho Min came out of the shower very happy and noticed that his wounds were almost healed. And looking at himself in the mirror, the guy thought he didn't look so thin. Even his body had gotten stronger. Maybe it was the supplements he was taking. Suddenly, Ho Min heard someone coming. It was more like Kang Ha Jin, which our hero was not happy about. It was like the door was about to be broken down, so someone wanted to get into the room quickly. Behind the door, however, stood a Platinum Monarch with a sly but rather pleasant face. Embarrassed and trying to cover his naked body, Ho Min didn't expect such a guest and asked what she was doing here. With some coquetry, the monarch said she was just worried about the guy that he might have drowned since he'd been in the shower for about 2 hours. And Ho Min replied that the thing is that he doesn't get this opportunity to bathe very often. Then the Platinum Monarch, in case Ho Min got free, called him to get the reward for the completed task. But Baek Ho Min was still confused and didn't understand what award the Platinum Monarch was talking about. While at the monarch's table, she told the boy that he was rude about his hands, although Ho Min didn't know how important that was. Placing her hands on his, she said that most hunters do not monitor the condition of their seal, but to increase the effectiveness of their skills, it must be maintained. And with a little disbelief at that, Ho Min still agreed with the above statement of the monarch. Afterwards, she said the tower system wasn't perfect. Gold seals can be restored, but his seal was made of steel, so it had to be manipulated manually. With surprise, Baek Ho-min realized that in that case, the monarch would visit him every week, and placing a platinum coin on Baek Ho-min's hand, she said it was his reward and it would improve his seal. With a strain, the guy said that these platinum coins are very expensive and to give them again. But like Platinum Monarch said, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's just bodily enhancement. It's because the young man is being mean to his body. Then she added that she would make his village a little stronger. For that, Ho-min was very grateful to her. Immediately afterward, our hero felt that his skin became tighter and firmer, and it seemed that he had more stamina. Slightly lowering her eyes down, the ruler said that if Ho-min gave a dig into his seal, she could make it even stronger since he would have access to stronger enhancements. But that was impossible because Baek Ho-min had constellations. Although she said that it would be nice if his constellations were sympathetic to her goodwill. The phrase about stronger improvements made Ho-min think a bit. The boy saw no downside to such an offer. He could become even stronger as a hunter, but it was still not clear to him whether he could tell her about the other constellations. And then the notifications from the constellations came again. But apparently Ho-min was so fed up with them that he couldn't help himself and said aloud for them to calm down. The Platinum Monarch clearly didn't understand such a prank, and her look said that she suspected something. And in an attempt to justify himself, Baek Ho-min stammered and said that it wasn't about her. Of course, the monarch realized that since he was not addressing her, he was saying it to his constellations, and they must have heard and understood Baek Ho-min perfectly well. In that same second, the guy regretted a lot and thought about what he had just done. Then more likes came from the constellations, but Ho-min didn't realize what they were for. One thing was clear to him now, that he had to think of something. He sighed and told the monarch that her offer was very tempting. However, the prospect of his seal being taken to pieces didn't appeal to him much, and the Platinum Monarch's tone changed to a sterner one, and she said she was his superior, and he, her hunter. Taking his hand, she said that they had a common goal, which was to get to the top. That's why Baek Ho-min had to risk his life now. Afterward, she asked the guy what the reason was for not wanting to say anything. Her touch made the boy unable to articulate what he wanted to say. She kept saying that he was talented, and she wanted to help him develop, and he should receive services appropriate to his abilities. But in order to do that, she needs to know about his skills. Everything she said was true, and Ho-min thought that suffering because he didn't tell her about his abilities was absurd. It occurred to him that he could lure the Platinum Monarch to his side. Then he'd be in the custody of the most powerful man in the city, and the ruler said she needed a trustworthy man with loyalty and strength. Of course, she would welcome an ally like Ho-min on her team. But Baek Ho-min hadn't had to work with someone he could trust yet, and it was hard for him to trust the man. To which the Platinum Monarch replied that because he doesn't have that experience, that's why he wants to be sure of the person to trust. She accurately described Ho-min's problem, and he agreed with her statement with a smile. So she offered him a way out of it. To build trust, the monarch suggested starting with something big by asking the guy if he had any experience with women. Baek Ho-min blushed at such a question. But even so, he answered the ruler no, and the Platinum Monarch said they were similar in that, since she had not had that experience either. Blushing slightly, the girl suggested that our hero try treating each other as romantic partners, that is, until they build up their trust. With tumultuous emotions, Baek Ho-min reacted to the Platinum Monarch's proposal. The constellations reacted in much the same way. One Dynamite expressed his support for Ho-min. He said that the Platinum Monarch's reaction was definitely different from past lives, and she had never shown such kindness to the guy. However, the only one said that the heart of the ruler was blacker than black, and that any kindness was out of the question. Addressing the Warrior King and Master Wizard Dynamite said that they had failed their lives, and now they had a new hope. In his head, the alchemist had already married Ho-min and the monarch, and was talking about how great it was that the guy was making his way through such a relationship. But the only one was sure that it didn't matter what kind of relationship those would be in if it was still bullshit since it was connected to the Platinum Monarch. And Baek Ho-min stood silently with a dreamy face and surprised at the same time and ran the phrase in his head that he would be dating a Platinum Monarch. However, he didn't even court girls. Of course, Ho-min had girlfriends, but his mind was always on survival, not romance. Then our hero decided to ask for help and came to Hangman Doll for advice on love affairs. But the executioner didn't understand why he asked her, and he told her in good faith that she was the best person for the role and she was the only one who could be asked to do it. because asking Kang Ha-jin to do so would definitely be wrong, since he was unrequitedly in love with the monarch. The hunter would quickly send him to the other side of the world. To herself, the executioner doll thought she knew how to refrain from feeling too much, and she certainly had more experience making women lifeless than wooing them. But when it came to love stories, no one could beat her. She could definitely give advice on love affairs, and she enjoyed watching other people's relationships. Almost without hesitation, she agreed to help Ho-min. Almost jumping with happiness, Baek Ho-min clenched his fists and thanked the executioner for his help. But first, she told the guy that he should change his clothes, and Ho-min didn't even resist and was ready to do whatever she said. Trying on different costumes, our hero admired how handsome he was. However, the executioner was not satisfied with his outfits. Baek Ho-min seemed to be wearing something that couldn't be combined, so the executioner even threatened him to stop dressing up like a clown. And finally, the guy put together an image that the executioner liked, but not Ho-min himself. And the thing was, the girl couldn't stand Ho-min's endless boyfriend anymore. When he came to the cash register, it was time to pay for the items, and the clerk said 270,000 won. It was obvious that Ho-min was confused by the price. Starting to get angry, Executioner Doll asked him if he was going on a date and didn't bring a penny. Justifying himself, Ho-min said that the girl had asked him not to take his money because she was very rich. Gritting his teeth, the executioner said he would pay for him, but let him try not to pay her back. And knowing the consequences of not paying his debt, Baek Ho-min said he would pay back everything. And the executioner added that if someone like him appeared in a romance novel, she would kill him without a second thought. After leaving the store, the girl decided to ask where our hero was going to take his companion. Ho-min wanted to walk through the nooks and crannies because he was oriented there and knew good places. The executioner emphasized her words and said that bringing a girl to a place like this was not a good idea, but Baek Ho-min really thought he had come up with a cool idea. At that moment, the executioner thought that sending this guy to the other world would be the best salvation for all women. Just as she grabbed her sword, a woman's voice called out from behind Baek Ho-min. The boy did not hide his joy at the sight of the ruler, but she came an hour earlier than they had agreed. But the executioner was clearly surprised to see the monarch. A little embarrassed at the sight of the executioner's doll, the mistress inquired as to what the two were doing together. Trying to answer the question, the girl couldn't say anything good. Then the Platinum Monarch told the executioner that she and Baek Ho-min had a prior arrangement, and if she had any business with him, she should postpone it. And grabbing the guy's hand, the Platinum Monarch said it was time for them to go and moved forward. Baek Ho-min was taken aback by this action. But nevertheless, with a smile looking back at the executioner doll, Ho-min thanked her for her help. The girl thought that it looked strange that the monarch and Baek Ho-min were going on a date. While walking, our hero decided to approach the ruler, but she immediately corrected him by saying that it was a private meeting and that he should call her Yoon Seo-hyun. It was hard for the guy to switch to another tone of communication, but he asked how the girl knew he was here, and she said that she had previously installed a tracking device in his seal. Now, no matter where he is, she'll always know. Baek Ho-min replied with a laugh, thinking to himself that it was inappropriate to say such information with a smile like Madam did. He also noticed that they were on a strange date, as the monarch was just dragging him along as if she were taking him for a walk. Later, the monarch said they would now go down the nooks and crannies like the guy wanted. In this place, there were many men looking at Yoon Seo-hyun. It was obvious from the girl that she was rich, which attracted even more attention. At that second, Ho-min realized that taking the girl to a place like this for a date was a mistake, since the men were already aiming their knives at the couple to steal. Then he decided he had to fight back. As soon as he reached for the knife, the thieves were frightened and ran away. With a surprised face, Baek Ho-min didn't understand the reaction of the thieves, because he hadn't had time to do anything yet. It felt like they were scared of someone. He turned around and saw Executioner Doll standing behind a pillar. When he saw her, he was surprised that she was so obviously following them, and Yoon Seo-hyun was choosing where they would go next. 8 hours had passed since they started their walk. Baek Ho-min was already tired and still thought that this kind of power walking definitely didn't feel like a date. The executioner puppet was still following them, but Ho-min noticed that even she was getting bored. Then the Platinum Monarch herself realized something was wrong and asked Baek Ho-min about his feelings and heartbeat. And the guy said that his heart rhythm doesn't sound excited, so it's a normal heart rhythm. From the guy's feelings, Yoon Seo-hyun concluded with a smile on her face that their date was a failure. She wanted to offer him another activity that would definitely make their hearts flutter. Embarrassed and blushing, Baek Ho-min didn't say anything back to the girl because he didn't know how to react. So they went to a guy standing around 3 drinks. He said that if they made the right choice, their bet would be doubled. Looking at the cups, the Platinum Monarch guessed where the 100,000 won was, and Ho-min stood there with a nonchalant face and definitely couldn't think that trepidation meant that. After choosing a glass, the young guy who was holding the contest was saying that luck would be on the girl's side, and raised the glass. But it was unfortunately empty. Meanwhile, it was the 8th attempt. A frustrated Yoon Seo-hyun didn't understand how she failed to guess again. Ho-min said that they had already lost 1 million won and suggested that they move on. However, the girl refused the guy's offer and said that she wanted to return at least what she lost. And Baek Ho-min thought about Yoon Seo-hyun looking like a gambling addict right now, and whoever ran the contest was even more thrilled, because he never thought he'd meet such fools. But the ruler was just as wrong each time, much to the delight of the host of the contest. Then Yoon Seo-hyun turned to our hero and said that today must be a bad day, and even more so, not a good day for a date. And Ho-min again suggested that we leave. But suddenly, opening her lady's purse, the mistress repeated again that she would return all she had lost. And she pulled out a gold coin. With this, she impressed all those who were around to watch her lose. Using a gold coin in the game was a very reckless act, and even the presenter thought so. Though at that very second, the satisfied smile was gone from the man's face with the cups. He began to guess that instead of her, the catch was actually him. In a confident voice, Yoon Seo-hyun told the man that they were starting and asked if he knew what would happen if he backed out of the game. The guy couldn't break the rules of the Nook and leave it at that. However, his hands were shaking badly, and he could not use his tricks. Stammering, the guy asked the girl to make a choice, but in his head, he knew he still had a trump card up his sleeve. Then the girl asked Ho-min if his heart fluttered. Of course, he said yes, because at the sight of the gold coin, the heart beat faster for everyone standing there. And she confidently made her choice, saying that this was the end of the show. The presenter's eyes rounded to an impossible size. He couldn't believe the girl's choice. More specifically, he couldn't believe that Yoon Seo-hyun had lost again and didn't guess. The man was insanely happy about the outcome. Baek Ho-min thought that the girl was losing on purpose until now, but apparently that wasn't the case. The Platinum Monarch's eyes filled with even more sadness, as she was confident in herself this time as well. And she pulled more gold coins out of her purse. It was impossible to even count how many there were. Again, with a caustic smile on her face, Yoon Seo-hyun suggested that the host play one more time. The pageant host was already almost certain that the girl had gone off the rails, and he hadn't seen worse than her yet. Suddenly, a stern voice sounded from the crowd. A statuesque woman with a guard came out of the mass of people. It was this guy's boss. Together with her men, she began to disperse the gathered people and said that the concert was over. After everyone left, the woman sat across from Yoon Seo-hyun and asked who she was, and the girl asked if she was going to get into the bank, even though she didn't return the money she lost. With a grin, the woman replied that the monarch had not come here to spend all the change in her purse. And without finishing her thought, she looked at Ho-min and recognized him. He was known as the one who had sent the elder to the grave. Then, Baek Ho-min was surprised that she knew him, and following his thoughts, he thought with horror that she was one of the spider legs. At this point, all of the woman's guards started pulling out their weapons, and our hero realized that he had no other choice but to fight. And pulling out his weapon in response, Baek Ho-min said in his head that whoever pulled out his knife in any case, the opponent's head would be split in two.